faction brewing among us, none dared to voice their concerns to the president's wife. Instead, some part-time housewives and student employees quietly began resigning. As the situation unfolded, I found myself contemplating whether it was time to seek alternative part-time employment, unsure of what the future held in this changing environment. I found myself in the crosshairs of the president's wife, her sudden inquiry catching me off guard. "You've been working at the store for quite some time, haven't you? How's your child? Already in college? Which one?" she prodded, surprising me with her directness. "Yes, I've been here since the previous manager," I replied cautiously, not eager to delve into personal matters. Then, with a cutting tone, she remarked, "You seem rather incompetent. I doubt you even attended a decent college, did you?" Her words struck deep, but before I could respond, the register area became inundated with customers. I offered a quick nod to the president's wife and swiftly attended to my duties. In truth, my educational journey had ended with middle school. High school had been a tumultuous time, marked by bullying and eventual dropout during my third year. Since then, I had carved out a life as a part-time worker, eventually meeting my husband in a similar setting and building a life far removed from academic pedigrees. The president's wife, however, seemed to embody a stark contrast. She often boasted about her prestigious university background, yet curiously avoided divulging its name. It struck me as odd, but I brushed it off, lacking any particular interest. Perhaps she harbored preconceived notions about part-time workers like myself, assuming we lacked higher education. I recalled overhearing her discussing such matters with the store manager, leaving me to wonder if she looked down upon us. As murmurs circulated among fellow part-timers about similar interrogations, I found myself bracing for another encounter with the president's wife when, sure enough, she returned to the store the following day. "Excuse me," her voice cut through the air, signaling another potentially tense exchange. My attention snapped up when the president's wife directed her gaze towards me, a smirk playing on her lips as if she found amusement in some private joke. Despite the urge to react, I managed to rein in my irritation, keeping my emotions in check as she began to speak. "So, you're just a middle school graduate, aren't you? I never pegged you for a college goer, but to think you're managing here with that level of education is quite something," she remarked, her words dripping with thinly veiled condescension. I couldn't help but wonder where she had gleaned this information from, until I recalled the previous day's incident when the store manager had been scrutinizing the part-timers' resumes in the office. It seemed that what should have been confidential information had somehow found its way into the president's wife's hands. Annoyance bubbled within me at the thought of her freely sharing such personal details with other employees. I had never sought to fabricate my educational background, but the audacity of someone spreading rumors about my academic history grated on my nerves. While my fellow part-time colleagues seemed unfazed by the revelation, the president's wife took every opportunity to remind me of my supposed educational shortcomings. It became her refrain, peppering our interactions with thinly veiled jabs. "Maybe you wouldn't understand, being just a middle school graduate," she would quip, using my education as a pretext to assign me menial tasks like cleaning. The repetition of her taunts grated on my nerves, feeling a growing resentment towards my workplace. I began to question why I subjected myself to such treatment, feeling increasingly disheartened by her relentless needling. A few days later, when she returned to the store, her mere presence was enough to stir up irritation within me. As I attempted to sidestep her, she caught my eye and gestured towards the cardboard box storage area, an area typically left untouched as it was designated for supplier use. "People like you should be familiar with garbage," she sneered, her words laced with disdain. "Middle school graduates like yourself are just here to collect a paycheck." Her words stung. Delivered in the privacy of the back room, shielded from the scrutiny of customers. It was a deliberate attempt to belittle me, a reminder of my perceived inadequacies in her eyes. I had always managed to endure, especially since most interactions occurred in the bustling sales area. But on that particular day, the weight of my pent-up frustration became too much to bear. "Excuse me, but I believe I earned my paycheck through diligent work, regardless of my educational background," I interjected, my tone laced with simmering anger. The president's wife appeared taken aback, clearly unaccustomed to such pushback. "If you're going to be here, why not contribute something beneficial to the store? We're never quite sure what you're up to," she retorted, her words dripping with disdain. Ignoring the curious glances of passing colleagues, I pressed on. And what exactly are you contributing by gracing us with your presence? Chatting with the manager, flirting with male employees and high school part-timers, looking down on the rest of us. I challenged, refusing to back down. Her face flushed crimson with rage as my words hit their mark. Unlike someone like you, I have a busy schedule. Coming here takes time out of my day, she shot back, attempting to assert her superiority. I couldn't help but scoff at her assertion. Do you truly believe that? Neither the employees nor the customers share your sentiment. It's intriguing how some with impressive educational backgrounds prove utterly ineffectual in practice, I countered, releasing the resentment I had long harbored towards her condescending attitude. Clearly flustered by my unexpected retort, the president's wife struggled to conjure a suitable response, resorting to tired clichés. Do you honestly think you can continue working here after speaking to me like that? She challenged, her voice tinged with disbelief. Without hesitation, I delivered my final verdict. Then I'll resign, I declared, refusing to tolerate any further belittlement. In response, the president's wife let out a mocking laugh. Well, that'll save us on labor costs, she sneered, her words dripping with derision. I returned the smile, nodding in agreement. Yes, that's right. Good for you, I affirmed before making my way towards the locker room. Inside, I found a fellow part-timer who had witnessed the earlier exchange. I poured out the details of what had transpired, recounting the frustrations that had been building up. Mary, are you really quitting? She asked, her expression reflecting the sadness of our shared experiences over the years. It just hasn't been the same since the manager changed. It feels like we're only here out of obligation, I confided, echoing her sentiments. With so many people leaving, you'd think they'd hire more staff, but they'd rather cut costs. She nodded in understanding. It's becoming unbearable. I don't blame you for wanting out. Leaving the locker room behind, I headed towards where the manager and the president's wife were engaged in conversation. Without preamble, I made my intentions clear. That's it, I'm done, I stated firmly, meeting their surprised gazes head-on. The president's wife chuckled, seemingly amused by the news. So, the junior high school graduate is calling it quits. I wonder where someone like you will find work, she remarked, her tone dripping with condescension. I refuse to let her words rattle me. Even if I have nowhere else lined up, I won't be coming back here. I'll return my uniform next week. Thank you for everything, I declared, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. As I exited the supermarket, a sense of relief washed over me. The following week, when I returned to return my uniform, I found the store abuzz with commotion. The manager was being berated by irate customers near the cash register, suggesting some sort of transaction error. Despite the chaos, I felt a sense of peace knowing that I had made the right decision to leave. With my resignation already settled, I made my way towards the office to return my uniform. As I approached the door, the unmistakable voice of the president's wife reached my ears, giving me pause. Reluctantly, I pushed the door open, finding the former manager inside. Despite his new role at headquarters, my ingrained habit led me to address him as manager out of reflex. It seemed the president's wife had been engaged in conversation with him, but she hastily departed upon my arrival. What happened at the register? The former manager queried, his expression troubled. He proceeded to inform me of a spate of recent complaints at the store since my departure. With a cascade of resignations following mine, the store had been left scrambling to cope with the sudden exodus of part-timers and student workers. Though the manager attempted to fill in on the sales floor, his lack of familiarity with basic tasks like stocking shelves and operating the register led to a litany of customer complaints. Today's incident, however, involved a particularly embarrassing misstep. The president's wife, while conversing with a male employee, was mistaken for staff by a customer. Brushing off the inquiry, she exacerbated the situation when the manager inadvertently disclosed her true identity, sparking further discontent among patrons. As the register area swelled with customers, the absence of experienced part-timers compounded the chaos. Both unfamiliar employees and the manager found themselves manning the registers, resulting in numerous errors and lengthy delays. The escalating frustration among customers culminated in the manager facing a barrage of complaints, exacerbating an already tumultuous situation. Turning to me, the former store manager sought insight into the unfolding debacle, hoping for some semblance of understanding in the aftermath of my departure. When asked why I had decided to quit, I didn't hesitate to respond honestly. The The former manager seemed genuinely interested in my reasons for leaving, and I felt it was only fair to provide him with the truth. In turn, he confided in me that he had heard rumors regarding the president's wife's educational background. While he lacked specific details, the word on the grapevine was that she had only graduated from high school. This revelation left me pondering the irony of her previous educational condescension. Could it be that the president's wife, with her supposed lack of higher education, was projecting her own insecurities onto others? It certainly made her seem all the more formidable and unpredictable. 2 weeks later, the supermarket I had once called my workplace stood deserted. The usual throng of customers was conspicuously absent, a stark contrast to the bustling scenes of my former shifts. It's no surprise, given all those complaints, I mused to myself as I observed the desolate scene. Lost in thought, I was approached from behind by the former store manager. After exchanging pleasantries, he mentioned a new store opening just one station away. He extended an offer, asking if I would be interested in joining the team. It appeared that an employee he had trained was being promoted to the position of store manager at the new location. Knowing the caliber of this individual, I felt a sense of trust and reassurance. I nodded in agreement and wasted no time in reaching out to my former part-time comrades. Upon confirmation of my role at the new store, I discovered that some of my former colleagues would also be joining me, a comforting realization amidst the uncertainty of change. Under the guidance of an understanding manager, I quickly settled into my new role. The atmosphere was welcoming, and I found it easy to establish rapport with my coworkers, both old and new. The new store introduced innovative offerings, such as local side dishes and bread, which proved to be a hit with customers. As I embraced this fresh start, I couldn't help but feel optimistic about the opportunities that lay ahead. As I settled into my new role at the store, I was greeted by familiar faces from my time at the previous location. The transition to the new store went smoothly, marked by a successful launch and positive feedback from both customers and employees. However, I soon heard troubling reports about the old store. It had become notably quiet, and the manager found themselves facing frequent scoldings during head office meetings. A string of new hires as part-timers quickly came and went, exacerbating the ongoing staff shortage. Finding a new part-time job had brought a sense of relief, and I was content to work happily as I had before. But about a month into my tenure at the new store, the president's wife made a surprising appearance before me. Her unexpected visit seemed to be aimed directly at me, as she wasted no time in addressing the rumors she had heard. "I heard there's a junior high school dropout working at our store again, so I came to check," she stated bluntly. I couldn't help but sigh at her accusatory tone. "What's the issue?" "I haven't done anything wrong," I replied, feeling unfairly targeted. She persisted, laying blame at my feet for the troubles at the old store. But I refused to accept her accusations. "Isn't it more accurate to say that you're the one engaging in power harassment?" I challenged, frustration simmering beneath the surface. Former colleagues from the previous store attempted to intervene, but I waved them off. I couldn't let them shoulder the blame for something they weren't responsible for. As a middle school graduate, I can't possibly be held accountable for all the employees quitting, I asserted, refusing to be intimidated. The president's wife's anger flared at my defiance, but I stood my ground, supported by nods of agreement from fellow part-timers. "If you're having trouble understanding, let me spell it out for you. Your disdain for our educational backgrounds and the manager's incompetence have created a toxic environment," I explained, my words ringing with conviction. In the end, no one wants to endure power harassment while working part-time, and it was time for the president's wife to acknowledge the real issues at hand. When I accused the president's wife of power harassment, she immediately raised her voice in denial. "Are you trying to frame me without any evidence?" she retorted, her tone sharp with indignation. Just as she attempted to grab hold of me, the manager intervened, asserting firmly, "Can you please stop doing that to our part-timers?" Despite the risk to his own position, the manager stood his ground. "I am the manager of this store, and it's my duty to protect the employees. I will fulfill my role, whether you're the president's wife or not," he declared, earning applause from the other part-timers. With a resigned sigh, I reached for my smartphone. "I have evidence of power harassment," I stated calmly before playing a video. The footage showed the president's wife berating another part-timer at the previous store, clearly demonstrating a pattern of abusive behavior. As more part-timers stepped forward with their own recordings, it became evident that we had all experienced her mistreatment. "We're going to sue her," I announced, met with resolute nods of agreement from my colleagues and the manager. Furious at the manager's defiance, the president's wife impulsively fired him on the spot. But to her dismay, I revealed that I had recorded her dismissal as well, ensuring the manager's protection. Realizing the depth of her self-inflicted predicament, the president's wife attempted to flee. But before she could escape, I confronted her one final time. "There are more important things than education, aren't there? Sometimes humanity matters more than society," I remarked pointedly, causing her to pause. "How did you know?" she muttered, inadvertently admitting to her own insecurities. With her self-destruction complete, the president's wife retreated at a speed I had never seen before. In the aftermath, we pursued legal action against her, armed with solid evidence and the support of fellow part-timers. As news of her misconduct spread, similar complaints emerged from other stores, leading to a reckoning for her behavior. Forced to confront the consequences, the president demanded she repay her debts by working. It was a satisfying sight to witness her laboring angrily at a nearby drugstore, a fitting end to her reign of mistreatment. With a trustworthy manager at our helm, we continued our work with renewed dedication, free from the shadow of power harassment.
It was just a regular evening when I came home. The weight of the long day at work was still fresh, and my tired feet could feel every step as I climbed up to our small apartment on the 3rd floor. The familiar scent of our home greeted me, and for a moment, I hoped for a quiet evening. But that hope was quickly shattered. As soon as I opened the door, I found Mark, my husband, lounging on the old brown couch. He had the remote in one hand and a half-empty beer in the other. The television was blaring some show or another, but Mark's focus shifted to me as soon as I stepped in. "Betty," he started, not even greeting me, "I want a pie tonight." I blinked in surprise. "Mark, I just got back from work and I'm really tired. Can we have it tomorrow instead?" He didn't look happy. "You're home now, aren't you? So make a pie. It's not that hard." I sighed. I remember my mother always said to be understanding and accommodating. But sometimes it felt like it was always me doing the accommodating. Nevertheless, I headed to the kitchen, deciding that making a pie might be the quicker route to peace. The apartment wasn't big, just a single bedroom, a living area combined with a dining space, and a small kitchen. I quickly gathered the ingredients, hoping to finish the pie as soon as possible. As I was rolling out the dough, Mark strolled into the kitchen. "Make sure it's apple, and none of that store-bought crust stuff." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We had store-bought crust, but I knew better than to use it now. I made the pie from scratch, just like he wanted. It took me a good hour to prepare everything. The aroma of the baking pie filled the apartment, and for a moment, everything felt cozy and right. I dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, this pie could be the start of a pleasant evening. But when the timer went off and I took the pie out, letting it cool on the counter, my hopes were dashed again. Mark was back in the kitchen, barely waiting for the pie to cool down before taking a big slice. After a few bites, his face contorted in displeasure. Without a word, he picked up the plate and threw the pie slice onto the floor, where it landed with a sad splat. "That was terrible," he spat out. I was stunned. All my efforts, all the care I put into that pie, and this was the reaction I got. Tears filled my eyes, but I tried to hold them back. "What was wrong with it?" I managed to ask. "Everything," he replied curtly. "You should know better." I didn't know what to say. I felt so small, so insignificant. The shattered pie on the floor seemed like a reflection of our relationship, broken and messy. Feeling defeated, I cleaned up the mess, the weight of years of unhappiness pressing down on me. It wasn't just about the pie, it was about everything. The lack of appreciation, the constant demands, the way Mark looked at me or didn't look at me. All of it. That night, I knew I needed a break. I couldn't stay in that apartment. I needed to be with someone who understood, someone who cared. That's why I turned to William, my brother. He had always been my rock. Grabbing my bag and leaving the mess behind, I decided to spend the night at his place. William's home was a cozy 2-story building with a small garden in the front. I didn't even have to knock. He must have heard my car because he opened the door before I reached it, his face filled with concern. "Betty?" he started, pulling me into a comforting hug. "What happened?" Tears streamed down my face as I mumbled, "He threw the pie, Will. The pie I made after a long day at work. He just threw it on the floor." William led me inside, settling me on the soft couch in his living room. "Tell me everything," he urged, handing me a cup of hot tea. Sipping the warm drink, I began to recount the events of the evening. As I spoke, memories of the past also surfaced. "It wasn't just tonight, Will. It's been this way for years. I always thought things would change, that he would change. Remember when we first met at Jenna's party? He was so charming then." William nodded. "I remember. But Betty, people can put on a facade for a while, but their true colors always come out. You know," I continued, "when we first got married, everything was great. We'd go on dates, laugh, talk for hours. But as the years went by, he changed, or maybe I just saw the real him." William's face tightened. "He didn't start off this way?" I shook my head. "No, we'd have our disagreements, but it was never like this. Over the years, he just became more demanding, more critical. I don't know when I started feeling like I was walking on eggshells around him." William sighed deeply. "You know, Mom and Dad had their issues, but Dad never treated Mom this way." "I know," I replied, tears forming again. "I thought I could change him, make him see how hurtful he was being. But no matter what I did, it was never good enough." William looked at me seriously. "Betty, love doesn't work that way. You can't change someone who doesn't see a problem in their actions." I looked down, taking another sip of my tea. I remember when Mom and Dad would argue, but Dad would always apologize, always make up for it. Mark never does. There was a pause. Then William said, "Betty, you deserve better. Remember when we were kids? We promised each other we'd always be there. I'm here for you now. You need to think about yourself, your happiness." I nodded, taking in his words. The realization was growing within me. This wasn't the life I envisioned for myself. I deserved respect, love, and care. And it was clear I wasn't going to get that from Mark. "You're right," I finally admitted. "I can't keep living like this. It's time to make a change." William squeezed my hand. "I'll be with you every step of the way." The morning light filtered through the curtains of William's guest room. I stretched, feeling more rested than I had in a long time. The decision to divorce Mark had brought with it a mixture of relief and apprehension. Walking downstairs, I found William already up, making breakfast in the kitchen. "Morning, sis," he greeted with a warm smile. "Good morning," I replied, pulling up a chair at the dining table. He placed a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of me. "You need to eat. Big day today." I nodded, taking a bite. "I'm nervous, Will, but it's the right thing to do." He sat across from me, sipping his coffee. "It's never easy, but remember, you're doing this for yourself, and I'm right here with you." After breakfast, William drove me to the lawyer's office. As we parked, I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the steps ahead. Inside, we were greeted by Mrs. Harris, a stern-looking woman with sharp eyes. But as she spoke, her kindness shone through. "Betty, I understand this is a difficult time for you. My job is to guide you through the legal process and make sure your interests are protected," she said. "Thank you," I whispered, feeling grateful for her support. The meeting was long, filled with paperwork and legalities. Mrs. Harris explained everything patiently, ensuring I understood my rights and the process ahead. As the days turned into weeks, life became a whirlwind of appointments, meetings, and paperwork. Mark, to my surprise, remained silent throughout this time. He neither signed the divorce papers nor contested them. He simply seemed to have disappeared. This silence was unsettling. One evening, while sitting with William in his living room, I expressed my concerns. "It's strange, Will. Mark hasn't reacted at all. No calls, no messages, nothing. It's like he's vanished." William looked thoughtful. "It is odd, especially given how he was earlier, but maybe he realized his mistakes and wants to move on." "I hope so," I sighed, though a nagging doubt lingered. Life continued its pace. I started looking for a new place to live. I wanted a fresh start, a home where I could rebuild my life without the shadows of the past. After a few weeks of searching, I found a beautiful house. It was spacious, with large windows letting in plenty of light, a stark contrast to the dim apartment I had shared with Mark. I felt a connection the moment I stepped in. This was my new beginning. William was ecstatic when he saw the place. "It's perfect for you, Betty, a place to call your own." As we toured the house, I shared my plans with him. "I want to paint the walls light blue, maybe have some plants by the windows." He chuckled. "Always the planner. It sounds wonderful." Moving in was a joyous occasion. With the help of William and a few friends, the house quickly started to feel like a home. Every evening, after work, I'd return to my sanctuary, relishing the peace it brought. However, that peace was short-lived. One fateful evening, as I returned home, I found the front door ajar. A chill ran down my spine. Pushing the door open, I stepped in cautiously. The sight that greeted me was unexpected and alarming. There, in the living room, sat Mark. My heart raced as I took in the scene before me. Mark sat at my dining table, his belongings scattered around. A sense of violation washed over me. This was my space, my sanctuary, and he had invaded it. "What are you doing here, Mark?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up, his face showing a mix of smugness and defiance. "Well, it's our house, isn't it? We're still married, Betty. But I bought this house after we separated. It has nothing to do with you," I shot back. Mark sneered, leaning back in the chair. "Doesn't matter. As your husband, I have every right to be here." Just then, Anna, my au pair, walked in, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, Betty. He showed me his ID and marriage certificate. He said he had every right to be here. I didn't know what to do." I sighed. "It's okay, Anna. This isn't your fault." Turning my attention back to Mark, I said, "You need to leave, Mark. This is my home, not yours." Mark chuckled. "Think again, sweetheart. I'll be staying here. And if you try to kick me out, I'll make sure to claim half of everything in our divorce." The audacity of his claim left me reeling. I felt trapped, cornered in my own home. But I couldn't let him see my fear. I needed to be strong. "Fine," I said, trying to sound calm. "Stay tonight. But tomorrow, I'm getting a lawyer, and we'll see who has the right to be here." Mark smirked. "Bring it on. I'm not going anywhere." Feeling defeated, I retreated to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I needed to think, to come up with a plan. Grabbing my phone, I called William. "Will," I said, tears forming. "He's here, at the house. He says he has a right to it." William's voice was filled with anger and concern. "Stay calm, Betty. I'm on my way. We'll sort this out." Hanging up, I tried to calm my racing heart. Mark's sudden reappearance and bold claims had taken me by surprise. But with William by my side, I felt a glimmer of hope. Within minutes, William arrived. I heard the two of them talking in hushed tones downstairs. The tension in the air was palpable. After what felt like an eternity, William came up to my room. "Betty," he began, his face serious, "there's something you need to know. When we bought this house, I made sure it was in my name. I had a feeling Mark might pull something like this. Legally, he has no claim to this property." A wave of relief washed over me. "Thank you, Will. I don't know what I would do without you." He hugged me. "We're family. We look out for each other." The next morning, armed with the property papers and William's unwavering support, I confronted Mark. Seeing the documents, he realized he had no ground to stand on. His smugness from the night before had disappeared. "This isn't over, Betty," he hissed as he left. Days turned into weeks. With every passing day, the intrusion by Mark felt more like a distant memory, but the threat he posed remained. William and I, however, weren't about to sit idly by. One evening, as we sat in the living room, William looked at me with a seriousness I had seldom seen. "Betty, I've been thinking. We need to be prepared for any moves Mark might make. He's unpredictable." I nodded. "I've been feeling the same. But what can we do?" William paused, taking a deep breath. "I've hired a private detective. I wanted to know what Mark's been up to since the two of you separated." I looked at him in shock. "A private detective? Will, Is that necessary? William sighed. I just have this gut feeling. I want to make sure we have all our bases covered. I understood William's concerns. His protective nature was one of the things I cherished most about him. All right, I conceded. What did the detective find? William pulled out a folder from his bag. As he spread the photos and documents on the table, my heart sank. The pictures showed Mark with various women. Some looked familiar from our past life. One document caught my eye, a police report filed by a woman against Mark. He did this? I whispered, disbelief evident in my voice. William nodded gravely. It appears Mark's activities haven't been on the straight and narrow. This could be our leverage. If he tries to make any more moves against you, we can use this against him. I felt a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, betrayal. I can't believe he sunk this low. William put a reassuring hand on mine. We'll get through this, Betty, together. A few days later, our preparation proved to be fortuitous. A letter arrived from Mark's attorney, making wild claims and threats about taking me to court for supposed shared assets and conjuring up fabricated tales about our life together. Reading the letter, my hands shook. But William, ever the pillar of strength, looked at me and said, "We're ready for this, Betty. We've got evidence. He can't intimidate us." With William's support, we met with Mrs. Harris again. As she read through the letter and went over the evidence we had against Mark, her face remained unreadable. After a long pause, she finally said, "We have a strong case here. Mark's claims are baseless, especially with the evidence we have. We'll counter this. Don't worry." Relief washed over me, but the idea of facing Mark in court was still daunting. William, sensing my anxiety, squeezed my hand. "We've got this. I won't let him hurt you anymore." The countermove was set in motion. Mrs. Harris swiftly drafted a response, highlighting Mark's activities and questioning the credibility of his claims. The ball was now in Mark's court. Every day after that was a game of wait and watch. William and I spent many evenings going over the possibilities, preparing for any scenario. Through it all, William's unwavering support gave me the strength to face each day. It was a rainy Tuesday evening. William and I were watching a movie when the knock echoed through the house. With a look of mutual surprise, I went to open the door. Standing there was a woman, soaked to the bone, her eyes red from crying. "Are you Betty?" she asked, her voice shaky. I nodded cautiously. "Yes, who are you?" She took a deep breath. "My name is Jenna. I was involved with Mark." My heart skipped a beat. "Come in," I said, motioning for her to enter. Once seated, Jenna began her story. "I met Mark a few months ago. At first, he seemed charming, but soon he started showing his true colors. I heard about you, about his past, and I thought I should come and warn you." "Warn me?" I thought. What could be worse than what I already knew? Jenna continued, tears streaming down her face. "He became aggressive, possessive. He said things about you, about how you'd ruined his life, and he wanted revenge." William's face darkened. "What kind of revenge?" Jenna hesitated, looking down. "He talked about ruining you financially, said he had friends who could make it happen." The room was silent for a few minutes, the gravity of Jenna's words sinking in. Finally, William broke the silence. "We need to do something about this. We can't let him continue to terrorize people." I nodded in agreement, feeling a newfound determination. We need to expose him, let everyone know who he really is. Over the next few weeks, with Jenna's help, William and I gathered more evidence against Mark. From his financial misdeeds to his numerous affairs, the depth of his deceit became apparent. It wasn't just me he had hurt. There were others, just like Jenna. With everything we had, William suggested we go to the police. It's time he faces the consequences of his actions. Walking into the police station, I felt a mix of fear and hope. Would they believe us? Would they take action? Detective Rogers was assigned to our case. As we laid out our evidence, he listened intently, occasionally asking questions. Finally, after what felt like hours, he spoke. "This is substantial evidence. We'll investigate further, but from what you've shown, it's clear that Mark has been involved in illegal activities." The next few days were a blur. The police acted swiftly, arresting Mark on multiple charges. The news spread, and soon, the monster I had once called my husband was unmasked to the world. Months passed after the revelation. With Mark behind bars, I should have felt safer. And while there was certainly a sense of relief, there was also the constant fear of what Mark's friends might do, those he had often bragged about, who he said would always have his back. One day, as I was returning from work, I noticed something odd. My mail was scattered all over the porch, and the front door looked like someone tried to tamper with it. Panic surged. Could this be one of Mark's allies? I immediately called William. "Will, I think someone tried to break in." "Stay calm," he replied, his voice firm. "I'll be right over." I waited inside my car until William arrived. Surveying the scene, he confirmed my suspicions. "It looks like an attempted break-in. We need to beef up your security." Over the next few days, William and I worked on improving the safety of the house, installing security cameras and an advanced alarm system. One evening, as we were testing the systems, the alarm suddenly blared. Rushing to the monitor, we saw a man skulking around the property. But before he could make any moves, the local police, alerted by the security company, arrived and apprehended him. I felt a rush of gratitude towards William. His foresight had prevented another potential disaster. The next day, Detective Rogers called. "Betty, we've got the intruder in custody. He claims he was sent by Mark, but we're still confirming the details." This confirmed my worst fears. Mark was still trying to control and hurt me, even from jail. Days later, I got a call from Jenna. "Betty, there's something you should know." She hesitated before speaking. "Mark's been reaching out to people from prison. He's been trying to spread lies about you." I gritted my teeth. "Thank you, Jenna. He won't get away with this." That evening, William had an idea. "Betty, we need to turn the tables. We've got evidence, Jenna's testimony, and a lot more. Let's go public." The next week, with the help of William's contacts, we scheduled a press conference. The media turnout was massive, with numerous reporters eager to hear my side of the story. As I stepped up to the podium, my heart pounded. "Hello, everyone. Today, I want to share my story, not just to expose Mark's cruelty, but to give hope to all those who've been in abusive relationships." I detailed everything, from our first meeting to the pie incident, to Jenna's revelations and the attempted break-in. As I spoke, the room was silent, every eye focused on me. When I finished, the questions began. "Do you believe Mark is still a threat?" I replied confidently. "Yes, but I won't let him or anyone else intimidate me any longer." Another reporter asked, "How do you feel about him now?" I paused for a moment. "I pity him. For someone to have so much hate, he must be truly miserable." After the press conference, the support was overwhelming. Messages poured in from all over, many from women sharing their own experiences. It was clear that by speaking out, I had ignited a movement. That evening, as I sat with William, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. "Thank you, Will. Today, I took back my power." William smiled warmly. "You always had it, Betty. You just needed a little push." The next morning, William dropped by. "Got some news," he said, a glint in his eyes. "Remember the intruder?" I nodded, recalling the fear of that night. How could I forget? "Well," he began, "the court has sentenced him, and with all the evidence stacked against him, he'll be locked up for a long time." Relief washed over me. "That's good to hear." "And there's more," he continued. "Mark's been transferred to a high-security prison. With his recent antics and connections, he won't be coming out anytime soon." I hugged William tightly. "Thank you for everything, for being there when I felt alone." William smiled. "Family sticks together." Weeks turned into months, and life started to regain its rhythm. I reconnected with friends, started a support group for victims of abuse, and even began dating again. On my birthday, I held a small get-together. As I looked around at the faces, William, Jenna, my new friends, and old ones, I realized how far I had come. The wounds of the past were healing, replaced by the joy of new memories. Late into the night, as everyone left, William sat down next to me. "You've done well, Betty." I looked at him, tears glistening. "With a little help from my friends." He chuckled. "Always." Hi, I'm Anna. I've been with Rob for quite a while now. We met in college, got married soon after, and have been together for 15 years. Life with Rob was generally peaceful. We lived in a decent house, had good jobs, and shared a bunch of common interests, but there was always something missing: a child. You see, we tried for years to get pregnant. We visited doctors, tried different treatments, and even considered adoption. But nothing worked. As time went on, the strain of our childless reality began to pull at our once strong bond. Arguments became frequent, and the future started to look a bit gloomy. But then, one day, something changed. It was a regular Wednesday morning. I woke up feeling a little queasy. Thinking it was something I ate, I brushed it off. But then I remembered I had missed my period. Could it be? I quickly rummaged through the bathroom cupboard and found a leftover pregnancy test from years ago. Without wasting a moment, I used it. Waiting for the result felt like the longest 3 minutes of my life. When I finally dared to look, it was positive. My heart raced. We were pregnant. The joy, the excitement, the fear, it all rushed in. I had to tell Rob. He was in the living room, engrossed in some paperwork. Taking a deep breath, I walked up to him, the test still in my hand. "Rob," I began, trying to keep my voice steady, "I'm pregnant." He looked up, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "Are you sure? I mean, at this age? Is it even safe?" I was taken aback. This wasn't the reaction I was expecting. "I took the test, Rob. It's positive." He sighed. "Anna, you know how hard it's been. And now, at 37, do you know the risks?" I felt a sting of hurt. "I thought you'd be happy," I whispered. "I am. I'm worried about you. About us," he replied, his voice softening a bit. "We've waited so long for this, Rob. We can't let fear dictate our happiness now," I countered. He looked down, avoiding my gaze. "Have you considered, maybe, not going through with it?" I couldn't believe my ears. Terminate the pregnancy? No, Rob. This might be our only chance. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of our situation pressing down on both of us. I wanted him to be as overjoyed as I was, but at that moment, all I saw in his eyes was fear and uncertainty. That night, as we lay side by side in bed, I held on to hope. Hope that our child would bring us closer again. Hope that our love was strong enough to overcome any challenge. And above all, hope for the future. The next few months were tough. As days turned into weeks, it became clear that this pregnancy wasn't going to be easy. I was often sick, nauseated, and felt exhausted all the time. But each little kick from inside reminded me why it was all worth it. One day, after feeling particularly weak, I collapsed. Thankfully, Rob was home and immediately rushed me to the hospital. As I lay on the cold hospital bed, surrounded by beeping machines, I felt more vulnerable than ever before. "Is she going to be okay?" I heard Rob ask Dr. Mitchell, his voice laced with worry. "She needs rest," Dr. Mitchell replied. "Her body is under a lot of strain due to the pregnancy. It's imperative that she stays relaxed and avoids any stress." That hospital stay was the first of many. Each time I was admitted, I'd watch Rob from the window, pacing back and forth in the hospital corridor, talking on the phone, sometimes even arguing with the billing department. One evening, as I lay in the hospital bed, Rob walked in with a weary look on his face. He looked like he hadn't slept for days. "I met with Dr. Mitchell," he began. "He said we need to consider the possibility of bed rest for the remainder of the pregnancy." I nodded slowly. "If it's best for the baby, I'll do it." Rob sat down next to me, holding my hand. "I'm sorry, Anna. I wish I could do more to help." I squeezed his hand. "You're here with me. That's more than enough." However, as the days went by, Rob's visits became less frequent. Sometimes he'd call, other times he'd send a text saying he was caught up with work. But the distance between us seemed to be growing. During one of my longer hospital stays, I was feeling particularly low. Missing the comfort of my home, I asked a nurse if I could use the phone to call Rob. "It's been 3 days," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice when he answered. "You haven't visited." "I know, Anna. It's hard for me. Seeing you like this," he admitted. "Rob, I need you, now more than ever." Silence. "I'll try to come by tomorrow," he finally said, his voice distant. But tomorrow turned into the day after, and soon a week had passed. Feeling isolated and alone, I confided in my nurse, Lisa. "He's probably just scared," she suggested, trying to be comforting. Sometimes, when people can't handle situations, they distance themselves. One morning, after a particularly difficult night, Dr. Mitchell came into my room. "I think it's time we discuss the birth plan, Anna," he began cautiously. "There are some decisions to be made." Rob, despite his absences, was there for that discussion. We sat, hand in hand, listening to our options, praying for the strength to make the right choices. Days turned into weeks, and as the date approached, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. But I held on to hope, believing that once our child arrived, everything would fall into place. Little did I know, the hardest part of our journey was yet to come. The first moments of holding my daughter, Emma, in my arms were moments of pure bliss. Her tiny fingers, her soft cooing sounds, it felt like a dream. But that dream was quickly shattered by Dr. Mitchell's grim announcement. "Anna, Rob," he began with a heavy sigh, "there are some concerns regarding Emma's health. We've observed some abnormalities that suggest she might have a severe condition." Rob's face paled. "What are you talking about?" "We'll need to run more tests to be certain, but it's important you're both prepared," Dr. Mitchell replied, his voice gentle but firm. That evening, as I cradled Emma, Rob walked into the room, a storm brewing in his eyes. He looked at me, then at Emma, and took a deep breath. "Anna," he started, his voice shaking. "How could you? Giving birth at this age? We knew the risks." Tears welled up in my eyes. "Rob, I thought we wanted this. I thought we wanted a family." He was nearly shouting now. "You should have considered an abortion. Why bring a child into the world with so many complications? Because of your selfishness, we now have a possibly sick child to look after." I was shocked. "Rob, she's our daughter. We should be together in this, not pointing fingers." His face was red with anger. "I can't believe I'm in this situation. I can't raise a child with potential disabilities. It's not the life I imagined." As the weight of his words sank in, a cold dread filled my heart. "So, what are you saying?" Rob hesitated for a moment. "I don't think I can do this. I can't be here, not like this." It felt like the floor had been pulled from beneath me. "You're abandoning your daughter because she might be different?" He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "I just can't handle it, Anna." Devastation turned into determination. "Fine. If you're leaving, then leave for good. But you'll have no claim over Emma." He didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving me with our newborn daughter, grappling with the uncertainty of our future. Asterisk, asterisk. The first few weeks after Rob left were the hardest. The house felt empty, the silence was deafening, and the reality of being a single mother weighed heavily on me. But every time I looked into Emma's big, innocent eyes, I felt a surge of determination. I was going to make sure she had the best life possible, no matter what it took. My sister Linda was a godsend during this time. She came over often, helping with household chores and looking after Emma so I could rest. One evening, as I was feeding Emma, Linda walked in, holding 2 mugs of hot cocoa. "Anna," she began gently, "you need to think about the future. Have you considered finding a place of your own?" I sighed, looking around the home that held so many memories. "I've thought about it, but the thought of leaving this place, it's just hard." Linda took my hand. "I know, but think about Emma. This house will always remind you of Rob and everything that happened. You both deserve a fresh start." She was right. I needed to let go of the past and focus on building a new life for Emma and me. The search for a new place wasn't easy. With my limited savings and no job, options were limited. But then, one day, Linda called me excitedly. "Anna, You won't believe what I found. There's a small house for rent in my neighborhood. It's perfect for you and Emma. I went to see the house the very next day. It was a cozy 2-bedroom place with a small garden in the back. The landlord, Mrs. Peterson, was a kind, elderly lady who lived next door. "Linda speaks very highly of you," Mrs. Peterson said, smiling warmly. "The place is yours if you want it." I felt tears of gratitude welling up. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. This means so much to me." Moving in was hectic, but with Linda's help, we managed. As I set up Emma's room, filling it with toys and her tiny clothes, a sense of peace washed over me. This was our home, our sanctuary. Linda popped her head into the room. "How's it going in here?" I smiled, hugging Emma close. "It's perfect. I can't thank you enough." She hugged us both. "That's what family is for. You're not alone in this, Anna. Remember that." Days turned into weeks, and life began to settle into a new routine. Morning walks with Emma, visits to the local park, and coffee dates with Linda became our new normal. One day, as Emma and I were playing in the garden, Mrs. Peterson walked over, holding a tray of freshly baked cookies. "Thought you two could use a treat," she said, smiling. I smiled back, taking a cookie. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. It's delicious." She chuckled. "Call me Ellie. Feels strange being called Mrs. Peterson by my new neighbor." We chatted as Emma giggled and played. Ellie shared stories of her own children, offering advice and wisdom. I felt a connection, a sense of community that had been missing for so long. As the days went by, the pain of the past began to fade. With the support of my sister and new friends like Ellie, I realized that while one chapter of my life had closed, another, even more beautiful one, was just beginning. Emma's first birthday was just around the corner, and I was deep in preparations. Ellie and Linda offered their assistance, suggesting ideas for decorations and games. As the day drew nearer, I found myself reflecting on the whirlwind of the past year. My baby girl, Emma, was blossoming into a bubbly, inquisitive child, her laughter a constant source of joy. One afternoon, as I was laying Emma down for her nap, the phone rang. The sound was sharp and unexpected. "Hello?" "Hello, Anna," came the familiar voice. It was Dr. Mitchell. I felt a twinge of anxiety. "Dr. Mitchell, is there a problem?" He hesitated, which only deepened my concern. "Anna, I need you to come to the hospital. There's something about Emma we need to discuss." I felt my heart in my throat. "Is she okay?" His voice was thick with regret. "Please come in. We need to talk face to face." Linda agreed to watch Emma while I rushed to the hospital. The drive felt much longer than it was, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Dr. Mitchell greeted me in his office, his usually calm face lined with worry. "Anna, I'm so sorry to call you in this way." My patience was thinning. "What's going on?" Taking a deep breath, he began. "There's been a grave error. The initial tests we ran on Emma after her birth got mixed up with another baby's." My confusion grew. "Meaning?" He met my gaze, his eyes filled with regret. "Emma is healthy, Anna. She doesn't have any medical condition. I can't express how deeply sorry I am." The weight of his words hit me hard. "You mean to tell me I've lived this past year under false assumptions? My life turned upside down because of this?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes, and it's my responsibility. I can't begin to fathom the pain this has caused." I thought of Rob, of the bitterness and the pain. This mistake, it's shattered my life. Dr. Mitchell looked defeated. "I know words can't change the past, but I'll do everything I can to make it right." I took a moment to collect my thoughts. I need time to process this. Driving home, a mix of relief and fury consumed me. Yet, seeing Emma's joyful face as I walked in grounded me. She was my world, and she was okay. That night, Linda and I sat down, and I relayed everything. She was horrified. "Anna, what are you going to do?" I looked at Emma, peacefully sleeping. "For now, nothing. And I don't want Rob to know. He made his choice." Linda squeezed my hand. "You're strong, Anna. Remember, you're not alone in this." In the stillness of the night, I reflected on our journey. Yes, The revelation about Emma's health was bittersweet. But one thing was for sure. I would protect and cherish her, regardless of the past. The swift passage of time amazed me. Before I knew it, Emma was already 5 and gearing up for her first day of school. My feelings were a whirlwind of pride, hope, and the natural apprehension of a mother. At breakfast, a few days before school, Emma gazed at me, her eyes shimmering with anticipation. "Mom, will I be going to school like other kids?" I smiled warmly. "Yes, sweetie. In just a few days, you'll be starting." Her face lit up. "Will I find friends there? Will they like me?" Touched by her innocence, I assured her, "Emma, you're such a lovely girl. Of course, they'll adore you." On her first day, dressed in her new school uniform with a pink backpack hanging from her shoulders, Emma paused at the school gates. With a quiver in her voice, she admitted, "Mommy, I'm scared no one will talk to me." I crouched to her eye level. "Honey, always remember to be yourself. You're amazing, and they'll see that. Just give it some time." Her small hand waved goodbye as she joined the bustling crowd of students. I watched her until she was out of sight, my heart heavy with the typical worries of a parent. A few weeks later, Emma was all excitement and stories about her new friend Sophia. Their adventures during breaks, their shared love for painting, and their little secrets. One day, she bounced home asking, "Mom, can Sophia come over tomorrow?" Delighted at her blossoming friendship, I agreed. "Absolutely. I'm eager to meet your new buddy." The next afternoon was filled with their giggles and playful shouts. From the corner of my eye, I noticed their genuine bond and thought of how childhood friendships were so pure and uncomplicated. As the sun dipped, a car pulled up. Emma, holding Sophia's hand, led her to the door. To my shock, standing there were Rob and a young woman, presumably his new wife. "Emma, inside. Now." Rob's voice was curt. Sophia, sensing the tension, looked worriedly between her parents and me. "Daddy, I had so much fun. Emma's my best friend." Rob's gaze was cold. "Sophia, we've talked about this. You shouldn't play with ... inferior children." His voice dripped with disdain, making it clear whom he referred to. I felt a rush of anger. Before I could retort, the young woman, probably trying to mediate, gently tugged at Sophia's hand. "Come, dear, let's go home." Emma stood close to me, her eyes filled with confusion and hurt. As the car drove away, she whispered, "Mom, why did he say that?" Holding her close, I replied, "Sometimes, sweetie, people don't say the nicest things, but always remember, you're wonderful just the way you are." That evening, as I tucked Emma in, I promised myself that no matter what, I'd always protect her from the cruel judgments of the world. Only days after the incident, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered, "Hello?" A woman's voice, soft yet firm, responded. "Hi, this is Emily, Sophia's mother. Can we talk?" Surprised, I replied cautiously, "Of course. What's on your mind?" She hesitated. "I'd rather discuss this face to face. Can we meet tomorrow? There's a cafe around the corner from your house." After a moment, I agreed. "All right, see you at 10 a.m.? The next morning, I saw Emily waiting. She looked out of place, her pristine appearance contrasting with the laid-back vibe of the cafe. As I approached, she stood up, offering a polite, if slightly forced, smile. "Thank you for coming," she began, her eyes searching mine. "After the other day, I couldn't shake off a nagging feeling that there's more to the story than Rob's told me." I took a deep breath. "I'm not one to spread tales, but since Sophia is involved, I think you should know." She leaned forward, anticipation evident. "Please, tell me everything." Over the next hour, I unfolded our past. How Rob and I had struggled with fertility, my unexpected pregnancy, his disinterest, the misdiagnosis, his leaving, and my subsequent journey with Emma. I made sure to be factual, not letting emotion color the narrative. Emily sat stunned. "He never told me any of this. He said you were the one who left him, and he always painted such a rosy picture of your marriage." I shrugged. "Sometimes people craft stories to cope, or to hide." She looked defeated. "I feel like such a fool. I thought our love was genuine, but now it seems like he was just replacing one life with another. "Emily," I started, my tone firm. "It's not about him anymore. It's about Sophia and Emma. They've formed a bond. I don't want Emma to suffer because of our past." She nodded. "I completely agree. Children shouldn't be dragged into adult disputes." As we parted, I felt a weight lifted. For the first time, I felt like I was truly free from Rob's shadow, having laid our past bare. That evening, as Emma played with her toys, she looked up. "Mom, will I see Sophia again?" Smiling, I said, "Yes, sweetie, you will. And always remember, your past doesn't define your future. You do." My phone buzzed on the coffee table, startling me from my thoughts. Rob's name flashed on the screen, a name I hadn't expected to see in a long time. Hesitating for only a moment, I answered. "Anna." Rob's voice was filled with a mix of anger and desperation. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I frowned, taken aback. "What are you talking about?" "Emily left me," he spat out bitterly. "She filed for divorce, and she's taken everything. I've lost almost everything, Anna, and it's all because she spoke to you." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. "Rob, you made your choices. I just told her the truth." There was a heavy pause. "She also told me about Emma, that she's healthy. You never told me." "Why would I? After everything you said, after everything you did, you didn't deserve to know," I retorted. Rob's voice grew softer, almost pleading. "Anna, I made a mistake. I realize that now. I want to be there for Emma. I want to be there for you. We can be a family again." I scoffed in disbelief. "Now that your life's in shambles, you suddenly want us back? You're unbelievable, Rob." "Anna, I know I messed up, but I've changed. Please, give me a chance." I could feel anger rising in me. "You walked out on us, Rob. You called our daughter inferior and turned your back. Now that your little fairy tale with Emily has ended, you think you can just waltz back into our lives? Think again." He sounded desperate now. "I was wrong, Anna. I see that now. Can't you give me another chance?" "No," I replied firmly. "Emma and I have moved on. We're doing just fine without you, and we don't need or want you in our lives." "But Anna..." "It's over, Rob. Goodbye." I ended the call, my heart racing. I took a deep breath, letting the emotions wash over me. Emma and I had each other, and that was all that mattered. I wouldn't let Rob's selfishness disrupt our peace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we'd face them together. The first time I laid eyes on Michael was at a college seminar. We were both there for extra credits, though our paths were quite different. He was a business major while I was pursuing literature. I was drawn to him from the moment he raised his hand and posed a challenging question to the professor. After class, we found ourselves at the same coffee shop, and from there, it just seemed like the universe wanted us to be together. We chatted about everything, from college, hobbies, to our childhood memories. "I come from a pretty strict background," he mentioned, taking a sip from his cup. "My parents are deeply religious." I remember shrugging. "So? My parents are free thinkers. They always taught me to question everything." Michael laughed. "Sounds like we're from different planets." But despite our differences, there was an undeniable chemistry. We began to see each other more frequently, studying together and exploring the city during the weekends. About 2 years into our relationship, we decided to move in together. It was a practical decision. Our apartments were far from the university, and sharing a place made sense. Plus, we were inseparable by then. However, when Michael broke the news to his parents, it wasn't received well. At a dinner at their house, Mrs. Davis, Michael's mother, was the first to voice her concerns. "Living together before marriage? Michael, you know how we feel about that." Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mom, times have changed. It's not a big deal." Mr. Davis chimed in. "In our house it is. You're living in sin." I could feel the weight of their stares. Wanting to ease the tension, I said, "We respect your beliefs, but this is our decision. We're adults." Mrs. Davis sighed. "It's just not the way we raised you." Michael took my hand. "Lizzie and I love each other. We want to start our life together, and I hope you can support that." The evening ended on a somber note, but Michael and I were firm in our decision. We found a cozy apartment close to campus and moved in. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Our bond grew stronger, but the strain with his parents was always in the background, like an old radio playing a sad tune. One evening, as we were settling into our new life, there was a knock on the door. It was Mrs. Davis, holding a pie. "I thought I'd come by and see how you two are doing," she said, looking around with a critical eye. "We're doing great, Mrs. Davis," I replied, trying to be cordial. She sat down, placing the pie on the table. "This is all temporary, right? You'll get married soon?" Michael cleared his throat. "We haven't decided that yet, Mom." As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the constant pressure from Michael's parents started to weigh on us. Our once carefree dates and movie nights began to have a shadow, the looming expectation of marriage. One evening, while we were making dinner together in our tiny kitchen, Michael broached the subject. "Lizzie, have you ever thought about, having a wedding?" I looked up from chopping the vegetables, surprised. "Like, for us? Are you proposing?" He smiled awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Not exactly. I mean, yes, I want to marry you someday, but right now, it's more about my parents. Maybe if we had a ceremony, they'd back off." I sighed. "So you're saying a wedding without the legal paperwork?" He nodded. "Just a thought. We can invite friends, make it a fun day. My parents get their wedding, and we get some peace." It wasn't the romantic proposal I'd imagined, but I understood his reasoning. "All right," I said slowly, "but on one condition. We do it our way. No big church wedding, just something small and intimate." Michael grinned, relief evident on his face. "Deal." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparations. We chose a beautiful outdoor venue, invited our close friends and family, and planned a simple but heartfelt ceremony. When we broke the news to his parents, their reaction was surprisingly subdued. "An outdoor wedding?" Mrs. Davis asked, raising an eyebrow. "Well, it's unconventional, but if it means you two are taking the next step, I suppose we can support it." Mr. Davis added, "As long as you're committed to each other, that's what matters." The day of the wedding was sunny and bright. I wore a simple white dress, and Michael looked dashing in his suit. Our friends cheered, and even Michael's parents seemed genuinely happy. During the reception, Mrs. Davis pulled me aside. "Lizzie, I want to apologize," she began, her voice soft. "I know we've been hard on you two, but seeing you together today, I realize that love is what truly matters." I smiled, touched by her words. "Thank you, Mrs. Davis. That means a lot." The day ended on a high note, with everyone dancing and celebrating our love. It felt like we had finally won Michael's parents over, and I hoped this would be a fresh start for us. But as days passed, their daily visits began. They'd drop by unannounced, often with unsolicited advice or thinly veiled criticisms. It was as if the wedding had given them a free pass to interfere in our lives. One evening, as Michael and I were unwinding after a long day, there was a knock at the door. Opening it, I found Mrs. Davis holding a casserole dish. "Just thought I'd drop off some dinner," she said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thanks," I replied, taking the dish. "But you don't have to do this." She waved a hand dismissively. "It's no trouble. I just thought, since you're always so busy, you might not have time to cook." I forced a smile, sensing the underlying judgment. "We manage, but thanks anyway." As the door closed, I sighed deeply. Michael wrapped an arm around me. "It'll be okay," he whispered. It started with the subtle comments, the not-so-innocent questions. "Why is the house so messy?" Or, "Have you considered cooking something more nutritious?" Mrs. Davis would ask, her tone dripping with faux concern. One day, I came home from work, exhausted, to find her in our living room, reorganizing our bookshelves. "Mrs. Davis, what are you doing?" I asked, taken aback. She looked up, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "Just thought I'd help tidy up a bit. These shelves looked so cluttered." Michael entered from the kitchen, holding 2 cups of tea. "Mom's just helping out, Lizzie," he said, trying to play mediator. I took a deep breath, my patience waning. "This is our home, Michael. We didn't ask for help." Mrs. Davis pursed her lips, her eyes watering. "I'm just trying to be helpful. After all, now we're family." Days like these became more frequent. They'd pop by without notice, giving advice we never asked for, criticizing decisions we'd made together as a couple. It was clear they no longer saw boundaries. One evening, after a particularly trying visit from his parents, Michael and I sat down for a heart-to-heart. "Michael, this has to stop," I began, my voice trembling with frustration. "I can't live like this, feeling like I'm constantly being judged in my own home." He ran his fingers through his hair, looking equally stressed. "I know, Lizzie. It's just, they're my parents. I don't know how to tell them to back off without hurting their feelings." I replied, "But what about our feelings? Our peace of mind? We can't keep sacrificing that for them." A week later, we invited them over for dinner, deciding to address the issue head-on. The evening started off pleasantly enough. We chatted about work, friends, and the latest news. But as the main course was served, I took a deep breath and dove in. "Mrs. Davis, Mr. Davis, we invited you over because there's something we need to discuss," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. Mr. Davis looked up, his fork pausing mid-air. "What's the matter?" I exchanged a glance with Michael, who nodded in encouragement. "It's about the frequent visits and, well, the constant input on our lives." Mrs. Davis looked taken aback. "We're just trying to help." Michael took over. "Mom, Dad, we appreciate that you care, but it's becoming overwhelming. We need some space to live our lives, make our mistakes, and grow together." Tears formed in Mrs. Davis's eyes. "After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" Mr. Davis added, his voice stern. "We're just looking out for you. It seems Lizzie here doesn't appreciate family." I felt a pang of guilt, but stood my ground. It's not about appreciation. It's about respect, respecting our boundaries and our choices. The room grew silent, the tension palpable. Mrs. Davis dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, her shoulders shaking. "We just wanted to be part of your lives. I never thought it'd come to this." Michael looked torn, his loyalty divided, but he held firm. "Mom, we love you, but this is our life. We need you to understand that." The evening ended with Mrs. Davis in tears, Mr. Davis looking disappointed, and an unspoken agreement that things had to change. As they left, I felt a mix of relief and dread, wondering what the future held for our relationships. Days after the confrontation, the house felt unusually quiet. The constant visits had stopped, but the silence was both a relief and a curse. Every time the doorbell rang or there was a knock, my heart would race, expecting it to be Michael's parents, but it never was. One evening, as Michael and I sat on our couch, he broached the topic. "Lizzie, do you think we were too harsh? I mean, they're my parents. Maybe we overreacted?" I took his hand, feeling its warmth. "Michael, it's not about being harsh. It's about setting boundaries. We did what we had to do." He sighed deeply. "I know, it's just hard. I never imagined being in this situation with them." As days turned into weeks, we began to feel the weight of our decision. There were no more surprise visits, but there were also no calls or messages. It was as if we had cut ties completely. During this period, I often found solace in browsing property listings online. One day, as I was scrolling through, a beautiful house in a neighboring town caught my eye. It had a large garden, a spacious living area, and most importantly, it was far away from our current life. "Michael, come look at this," I called out. He joined me, peering at the screen. "Wow, it's beautiful. But why are you looking at houses?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "I was thinking, maybe it's time for a fresh start, somewhere new, where we can create our own memories, away from all this drama." He looked surprised. "You mean move? Leave everything behind?" I nodded. "It's drastic, I know, but maybe it's what we need." We discussed it at length, weighing the pros and cons. The idea of starting anew was enticing, but also terrifying. Yet, the more we talked, the more it felt right. A few weeks later, we visited the house. It was even more beautiful in person, and the neighborhood seemed perfect. After much consideration, I decided to use the money I had inherited from my grandmother to buy it. The day we signed the papers, I felt a mix of emotions. Excitement for the new beginning, but also sadness for what we were leaving behind. The move went smoothly, and soon we were settling into our new home. It felt like a dream. The peace and quiet were just what we needed. One evening, as we were enjoying a quiet dinner in our new dining room, Michael said, "Lizzie, I think this was the best decision we ever made." I smiled, feeling content. I think so too. The first few months in our new home were like a dream. The mornings were quiet, filled with the chirping of birds, and the evenings brought a calm, tranquil energy. Michael and I fell into a comfortable routine, enjoying the privacy and peace that our new surroundings provided. The past seemed like a distant memory, and the tension that once surrounded our lives had all but disappeared. Until one fateful day. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when the doorbell rang. Michael went to answer it. I heard murmurs, and then a familiar voice. My heart sank. It was Mrs. Davis. I walked to the entrance, my face revealing my shock. There they were, Mrs. and Mr. Davis, suitcases in tow, standing at our doorstep. "Mom? Dad? What are you doing here?" Michael asked, his voice filled with surprise. Mrs. Davis smiled, a bit too sweetly. "We missed you, dear, and we thought, why not pay a visit?" I tried to keep my composure. "It's unexpected." Mr. Davis chimed in. "We just wanted to see where our son is living now. Is that so wrong?" Michael seemed torn. "Of course not, but a heads up would have been nice." Mrs. Davis looked around, her eyes scanning our home. "Oh, what a lovely place you have here. Much nicer than the old one." I bristled but said nothing. The visit turned into a stay. One night became 2, then 3. They began to settle in, making themselves comfortable, much like they had in our previous home. One evening, after dinner, I pulled Michael aside. "Michael, we can't go down this road again. We moved to escape this." He sighed. "I know, Lizzie, but they're my parents. I can't just throw them out." "Then what? Let them take over our lives again?" Mrs. Davis, who seemed to have overheard our conversation, walked over, her eyes welling up with tears. "Is that how you feel, Michael? That we're a burden?" Michael looked helplessly at me, then back at his mother. "Mom, it's not like that. We just wish you had told us you were coming." She sniffled. "We just wanted to be close to our son, but it seems we're not welcome here either." I had a sinking feeling when I heard Michael's parents mention they'd made a decision about their living situation. The two of us had recently been discussing the matter privately, hoping to find a delicate way to address the issue. Now, it seemed the matter was going to be thrust into the open. "Lizzie, Michael," Mr. Davis began, "we have some news." Michael shifted in his seat, already sensing what was coming. "Go on," he prompted. Mrs. Davis, trying to sound cheerful, said, "We've sold our house. We realize there's no need for it when we have such a lovely family home here with you two." My eyes widened in shock. "You did what?" "We wanted to be closer to you both," Mr. Davis explained, looking earnest. Mrs. Davis looked hurt. "We are family. Why wouldn't you want us here?" I took a deep breath and said what I'd wanted to say for a long time. "This house, it's mine. It's not owned jointly by Michael and me. It's in my name only." I retrieved a file from the study, showing them the ownership documents. Mrs. Davis looked at the papers and then back at me, clearly stunned. "But you're married. What's yours is Michael's and vice versa." I smiled triumphantly. "That's where you're mistaken. We held a wedding ceremony, yes, but Michael and I never legally married. We never signed any official documents, so, technically, you're not my in-laws." The weight of my words seemed to hang in the air. Mrs. Davis's face turned a shade paler, her eyes widening in disbelief. Mr. Davis looked from me to Michael, seeking some form of denial. Michael took my hand, signaling his support. "It's true, Mom and Dad. We thought you'd be more accepting if we had a ceremony, but we never felt the need to get the state involved in our relationship." Mrs. Davis began to sob. "So, you deceived us? And now you're throwing us out?" The room was heavy with tension after the bombshells were dropped. Michael's parents were clearly taken aback, but it wasn't long before the shock turned into outrage. "So, you tricked everyone with a sham wedding? And you think that makes everything all right?" Mrs. Davis's voice had a hint of venom. Michael sighed. "It wasn't about tricking anyone. It was about the way we wanted to live our lives. The ceremony was for us, and those who wanted to celebrate our love." Mrs. Davis's face turned a shade redder. "You dare defy the sanctity of marriage, live together in sin, and then mock us with a fake wedding." "I've had enough," Mr. Davis declared, standing up suddenly. "You, young lady, are nothing but a sinner and a witch, trying to pull my son away from his family, his values." I was taken aback by the fierceness of their reaction, but I wouldn't let them intimidate me. "I have not taken Michael from anyone. He's made his own choices, and it's high time you respect them." Mrs. Davis's eyes were filled with tears, but her voice was stern. "Michael, come home with us. Leave this woman. She's done nothing but pull you into her web of deceit." Michael, ever the calm in the storm, replied, "Mom, Dad, I love you both, but my place is here, with her. She's been nothing but kind and understanding, even when you both haven't been. You can't just demand I leave her." "You're choosing her over us?" Mr. Davis's voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. "I'm choosing to live my life on my terms," Michael asserted. The room went silent for what felt like an eternity. The air was thick, every breath heavy. Mrs. Davis's face was a mask of hurt and betrayal. "Very well," she said, her voice cold. "But remember this, you're turning your back on your family, on your faith, all for her." "I'm not turning my back on anyone," Michael said. "I just wish you'd see that." Mrs. Davis's eyes were hard, her voice bitter. "Let's go," she said to her husband, not giving either of us another glance. And with that, they left, leaving behind a wake of hurt, confusion, and uncertainty. I looked at Michael, his face a mirror of my own feelings. We both knew that things had changed irrevocably, and there was no going back. A few days after the confrontation, as I was heading back from work, my neighbor, Mrs. Carlson, called out to me. She was an older lady, known for her daily walks and her uncanny ability to know everyone's business. "Did you hear about the Davis family not selling their house?" she asked with a knowing look. I paused, taken aback. "What do you mean?" She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "They never put their house on the market. I heard from Susan, who heard from Janice, who works at the town's real estate office. There's no record of the Davis property being up for sale." I felt a knot form in my stomach. Were they lying to us all this time? When I got home, I shared the information with Michael. He looked shocked. "I can't believe they'd lie to us. What were they trying to achieve?" We both knew the answer. They wanted to manipulate the situation to their advantage. The realization was a hard pill to swallow. All this time, while we tried to understand and accommodate them, they had been playing a game. Michael sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. This changes things. It's one thing to have disagreements, but outright deception? That's something else entirely. We can't keep letting them pull us into their manipulative games, I said firmly. We need boundaries, strong ones. Michael nodded. You're right. We can't continue like this. It's unhealthy for us and for our relationship. The next day, he went over to his parents' house. He needed to confront them, get some answers. When he returned, his face was a mix of anger and sadness. They admitted it, he began, his voice heavy. They thought that if they moved in with us, we'd be a proper family again. They felt threatened by our independence. We sat down, discussing our next steps. It was clear that for our own sanity and the health of our relationship, we needed distance from them. We need a break, Michael declared. Some time away from all this drama and manipulation. I agreed. It's the best decision for us right now. That evening, we sent a message to his parents, informing them of our decision. The reply was filled with anger and accusations, but we remained firm. We needed this, for ourselves and for our future. The next few weeks were quiet. We focused on each other, rebuilding the trust and closeness that had been strained over the past months. One evening, as we sat on our porch, looking at the stars, Michael turned to me. "Thank you," he whispered, "for standing by me, for fighting for us." I smiled, squeezing his hand. "Always." The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but it was a poignant reminder of the importance of boundaries, honesty, and mutual respect in any relationship. As the night deepened, we looked towards the future, hoping for peace and understanding. I'm Emily, 35, and if you'd asked me a few years ago, I'd have told you my life was just about perfect. I was climbing the corporate ladder at a renowned company, making my way to a department manager position. It was during those long hours at work that I stumbled upon something unexpected, something that wasn't part of my meticulously planned career path. Love. His name was Jake, a colleague from a different department. He wasn't as high up on the career ladder as I was, but that never mattered to me. Our connection was instant, and before we knew it, our office romance blossomed into something deeper, leading us down the aisle. The company we worked for was supportive. After all, it wasn't a secret affair, but a serious relationship that everyone could see was genuine. We were happy, living in a beautiful, spacious house that we bought together. It was more than a home. It was a symbol of our future, of the family we dreamed of starting. But our seemingly perfect life wasn't without its cracks. The main issue? Our earnings. I always earned more than Jake, and while it never bothered me, it was a thorn in his side. One chilly evening, as we sat in our living room, Jake brought it up yet again. Does it ever get to you? The whole money thing?" he asked, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the fireplace. "No, Jake, it really doesn't. I love you, not your paycheck. We're in this together, remember?" I replied, trying to reassure him. He let out a long sigh. "I just feel like I should be the one bringing in more, you know? It's not traditional." I reached for his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "We're not a traditional couple, Jake. We make our own rules. We're happy, aren't we?" He nodded, but his eyes didn't mirror the conviction in his voice. The topic was a recurring one, resurfacing every now and then, each time leaving a faint but lingering unease in the air. Life has a way of throwing you off course when you least expect it. That's exactly what happened to me, Emily, on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday. It was supposed to be a routine medical checkup, nothing more. I sat there in the sterile doctor's office, fidgeting with the hem of my shirt, waiting for the usual all clear. Instead, what I got was a jolt that turned my world upside down. The doctor, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, had a serious look as she delivered the news. "Emily, I'm sorry to tell you this, but you have cancer," she said gently. For a moment, everything stood still. The word cancer echoed in my head like a dreadful bell. Fear, disbelief, a sense of unreality washed over me. What? Are you sure?" I managed to stammer, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. The doctor nodded, her expression empathetic. "I understand this is a lot to take in. We need to discuss your treatment options." Her voice faded into the background as I grappled with the shock. Cancer? Me? It didn't make sense. I was healthy, or so I thought. When I left the doctor's office, I felt like I was in a daze. The world seemed to go on around me, but I was stuck in that moment of devastating revelation. I called Jake as soon as I could. He answered after a few rings. "Hey Em, how did the checkup go?" His voice was casual, expecting routine news. "Jake, it's not good," I said, my voice shaky. "What's wrong?" "Talk to me, Em," he replied, his tone shifting to concern. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "It's cancer, Jakey. I have cancer." There was a heavy silence on the other end. Then, "Oh God, Em, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Where are you?" "I'm still at the clinic. I'm not okay, Jakey. I'm scared," I admitted, feeling a lump forming in my throat. "I'll come right over. We'll face this together, Em. You're not alone," he said firmly. Hearing his words, a small flicker of hope ignited within me. Maybe, just maybe, we could get through this nightmare together. The following days were a blur of appointments, tests, and consultations. I started my treatment, which included chemotherapy. It was exhausting, both physically and emotionally. Jake was supportive at first, accompanying me to my sessions, holding my hand, trying to be strong for both of us. But as the treatments took a toll on me, I noticed a change in Jake. His visits became less frequent, his reassurances felt more forced. Whenever I asked him why he couldn't come, he always had the same excuse. "Work is just crazy right now, Em. I'm so tired by the end of the day," he'd say over the phone. I tried to understand, to be sympathetic. After all, he was dealing with this in his own way, too. But deep down, I couldn't shake off the feeling of growing distance, the creeping sense of loneliness that started to envelop me. In those moments of solitude and struggle, I found an unexpected source of strength. My parents and my best friend, Lisa. They were my rocks, calling me daily, visiting me whenever they could, offering words of encouragement and love. While I was trying to adjust to my new reality in the hospital, undergoing treatment and dealing with the side effects, life outside continued. I missed our home, the comfort of our bed, the little rituals Jake and I had. Despite his decreasing visits, I clung to the hope that we were still a team. One day, Lisa came to visit. She brought some magazines, my favorite snacks, and a sense of normalcy that I craved. But there was something off about her. She seemed uneasy. "Hey, what's up? You seem a bit distracted," I said, trying to read her expression. Lisa hesitated before speaking. "Emily, I don't want to worry you, but something strange happened the other day." My heart skipped a beat. "What happened?" "Well, I was walking past your house, and I heard laughter. Loud, female laughter. It sounded like there was a party or something," she said cautiously. A cold shiver ran down my spine. A party? But Jake didn't mention anything. Maybe he had friends over. Lisa bit her lip, looking uncomfortable. "I don't know, Emily. It just felt weird. And I haven't seen Jake around much lately. I'm worried there might be someone else." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I didn't want to believe it, but the seeds of doubt were planted. Was Jake seeing someone else while I was stuck here, fighting for my life? "I need to know, Lisa. I can't just sit here wondering," I said, a sense of urgency rising within me. "I understand. But what are you going to do?" Lisa asked, her concern evident. "I need to go home. I need to see for myself," I decided, my mind made up. "But Emily, your treatment—" "I know. But I can't ignore this." "I have to know the truth," I interrupted, feeling a mix of anger, betrayal, and fear. Lisa helped me arrange for an early discharge. The doctors weren't thrilled, but my recent results were promising, and they agreed under the condition that I would continue my treatment on an outpatient basis. The drive home was nerve-wracking. Every possible scenario played out in my mind. I was scared of what I might find, yet I needed answers. As we pulled up to the house, everything looked normal from the outside. But the moment we stepped in, it was clear something was off. The place felt different, like it wasn't ours anymore. We heard voices coming from the living room. My heart pounded in my chest as we walked in, bracing for what we might find. To my utter shock, there was a couple sitting there, looking as surprised to see us as we were to see them. "Who are you? What are you doing in my house?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. The woman, probably in her late 30s, stood up. "I'm sorry, but who are you? We're renting this place." "Renting? This is my house. I live here with my husband, Jake," I said, struggling to process her words. The man, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "We've been here for a couple of weeks. We made a deal with Jake. He said the house was going to be sold, and we're interested in buying it." My world came crashing down at that moment. Not only was there another woman in my house, but now I was being told that my husband, the man I trusted, was planning to sell our home without my knowledge. I felt like I was in a nightmare, one that I couldn't wake up from. As I stood in the living room of what was once a symbol of our shared dreams, the couple who had unwittingly walked into this mess looked at me with a mix of confusion and pity. They introduced themselves as Mark and Sandra, clearly uncomfortable but trying to be polite. I could hardly focus on their words. My mind was in turmoil. "Please, can you call Jake? I need to speak to him," I said, my voice shaky but firm. Mark nodded, taking out his phone. "Of course, I have his number. He said to call if we needed anything." The wait for Jake to arrive was agonizing. My heart raced with a cocktail of emotions: anger, betrayal, disbelief. When he finally walked in, the look on his face was one of shock, but not the kind I expected. "Emily, what are you doing here? You should be in the hospital," he said, his voice tinged not with concern, but annoyance. His reaction only fueled my anger. "What am I doing here? Jake, what are you doing? Selling our house behind my back?" He had the audacity to look irritated. "I can explain, Emily. It's simple, really." "Explain? Explain how you could betray me like this?" My voice was rising despite my efforts to control it. Jake's expression hardened. "Listen, Emily, you're sick. The cancer might not even go away. I have to think about my life too. I can't be tied down, waiting for whatever comes next." I felt like I had been slapped. His words were cruel, unrecognizable from the man I thought I knew. "You're talking about selling our home, our life together, as if it's just a transaction. Is this really you, Jake?" Disbelief and hurt were evident in my voice. He shrugged, a cold look in his eyes. "It's practical, Emily. You're not going to make it, and I need the money to build my life. Besides, I would get this house anyway if you know." His words were like a knife twisting in my gut. The reality of his betrayal was worse than any suspicion I had harbored. "I can't believe you, Jake. After everything, this is what it comes down to. Money and convenience?" I was struggling to hold back tears. Jake seemed unfazed. "Life goes on, Emily. Yours might not, but mine will. I need to think about my future." His brazenness left me speechless. I had imagined many scenarios, but nothing could have prepared me for the callousness I was witnessing. "And you think you'll just get away with this? Selling our house, leaving me with nothing while I'm fighting for my life?" My voice trembled with a mixture of rage and pain. He shrugged again, a gesture that now filled me with revulsion. "I'm doing what I have to. You can do whatever you want, Emily. It doesn't matter to me anymore." I felt a surge of resolve amidst the chaos of my emotions. "I'll fight you on this, Jake, and the company will hear about how you treat your sick wife. You won't get away with this," he scoffed. "Do what you want, Emily. I'm done here." With that, he turned and left, leaving a trail of coldness behind. I stood there, shaken to my core, realizing that the man I loved was a stranger to me now. I knew at that moment that this was a battle I had to fight, not just for my health, but for justice and dignity. After Jake left, a heavy silence filled the room. Mark and Sandra stood awkwardly, clearly wanting to escape the tense atmosphere. I couldn't blame them. "Look, I'm really sorry about all this. We had no idea," Mark said, sounding genuinely apologetic. "Yeah, we just wanted a place to stay. We didn't know about everything," Sandra added, her eyes full of sympathy. I gave them a weak smile. "It's not your fault. You were just looking for a home." They offered to leave, but I insisted they stay. It wasn't their fault that Jake had dragged them into his deceit. After they left, I sat down on the couch, my mind racing. I felt betrayed, angry, and helpless. But amidst all those emotions, a fiery determination was taking shape. I wasn't going to let Jake walk all over me. The next morning, I called my lawyer and explained everything. He was shocked, but promised to help me fight this. "Don't worry, Emily. We'll make sure he doesn't get away with this," he assured me. I felt a small glimmer of hope. With my lawyer's help, I would fight for what was rightfully mine. Next, I knew I had to confront Jake at work. It wasn't going to be easy, but I needed to face him. I wanted him to know that I wasn't going to back down. I arrived at the office, my heart pounding. As I walked through the halls, I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me. They knew something was up. I knocked on Jake's office door and pushed it open without waiting for a response. Jake looked up, his face a mask of surprise and annoyance. "Emily, what are you doing here?" "I'm here to tell you that I know everything. And I'm not going to let you get away with it," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Jake scoffed. "What are you going to do? You're sick, Emily. You should be resting, not causing a scene." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I've spoken to my lawyer. We're going to fight you on the house, and I'm going to tell the bosses about what you've done." Jake's face hardened. "You think you can scare me? Go ahead, tell them, see if I care." I met his gaze squarely. "I'm not trying to scare you, Jake. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. You can't just throw me away because I'm sick." Jake leaned back in his chair, a smug look on his face. "You really think you can win this? I'm not the bad guy here, Emily. I'm just trying to move on with my life." I felt a surge of anger. By selling our home? By leaving me with nothing? Jake shrugged. "Life is tough, Emily. You should know that better than anyone." I shook my head, disgusted. "I can't even recognize you anymore, Jake. You're not the man I married." Jake's expression didn't change. "Maybe you never really knew me at all." With that, I turned and walked out of his office. I had said what I needed to say. Now it was time to fight. In the days that followed, my life turned into a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings, and strategy sessions. My health was improving, but my battle was far from over. With each passing day, I gathered more evidence to support my claim to the house. My larger financial contribution was a strong point in my favor, and I was determined to see this through. My lawyer was optimistic. "Emily, you have a solid case. The numbers don't lie. And given the circumstances, it's unlikely a judge will side with Jake," he assured me over the phone. The relief I felt was palpable. "Thank you," I replied. "I appreciate your help more than you know." "We're not there yet, but things are looking up," he cautioned. I understood. The legal world was unpredictable, but for the first time in a while, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. At work, the atmosphere was tense. My confrontation with Jake had become office gossip. Some colleagues whispered in corners, others offered quiet support. It was uncomfortable, but I couldn't let it distract me. I decided to meet with our bosses and lay everything out. It was a tough conversation, but necessary. I told them about Jake's betrayal, the house, everything. They listened, their faces a mixture of shock and empathy. "We're so sorry, Emily. This is unacceptable," one of them said. "The situation with Jake will be dealt with. This behavior can't be tolerated," the other added. Hearing their support was a relief. I didn't have to face Jake at work anymore. Days later, they called to tell me they had let Jake go. His actions didn't align with the company's values. It was a small victory, but it meant the world to me. My health was on the upswing, the treatments were working, and my doctors were hopeful. It was a glimmer of hope in a sea of chaos. One evening, as I sat in my small rental, contemplating my next steps, my phone rang. It was Jake. I hesitated but answered. "Emily, please, we need to talk." He sounded desperate. "What's there to talk about, Jake?" I asked, my voice firm. "I was wrong. I've been fired. I'm sorry, Emily. I didn't think it would come to this," he said, almost pleading. I took a deep breath. "You hurt me, Jake. Deeply. I can't just forget that." "I know, I regret it. Can we find a way to settle this without going to court?" he asked, sounding beaten. After a short pause, I replied, "I will not back down, never." There was silence on the other end. "I understand. I'll have my lawyer contact yours," he finally said. Jake's call didn't change anything. He had shown his true colors, and there was no going back. I was a different person now, stronger and more determined. After the dust settled with the house and my divorce, I found myself standing at the beginning of a new chapter. It was a strange feeling, like stepping into the unknown after a long, turbulent journey. My health was improving, but the road to full recovery was still ahead of me. One afternoon, I was at the clinic for a checkup. The waiting room was quiet, just the hum of the air conditioner filling the space. When the nurse called my name, I followed her to the examination room. Dr. Simmons, my oncologist, greeted me with a warm smile. "Good to see you, Emily. How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you," I replied, taking a seat. "That's what we like to hear," he said, going over my chart. "Your latest scans show improvement. The treatment is working." I exhaled a sigh of relief. "That's great news." "Yes, but remember, it's a long road. You need to take care of yourself," he reminded me. "I know, and I will," I assured him. He nodded, satisfied. "Good. We'll keep monitoring your progress." Leaving the clinic, I felt a mix of emotions. Hope, certainly, but also a sense of responsibility. This was my life, and I had to take charge of it. Back at work, I threw myself into my projects. It was a distraction, but also a reminder that I had a purpose beyond my illness and personal troubles. One day, I was in the break room when I overheard a couple of colleagues talking. "Did you hear about Jake? He's trying to get his job back," one of them said. "Really? After what he did?" "Good luck with that," the other replied. I stayed silent, stirring my coffee. Jake's choices were his own. I had my path to follow, and it didn't include him. After work, I met up with my friend Sarah for dinner. She had been a rock throughout everything. "How are you holding up?" she asked as we sat down. "I'm okay, taking it one day at a time," I answered. "That's all you can do, and hey, you're doing amazing," she said, offering a reassuring smile. I nodded. "Thanks, I couldn't have done it without your support." "We're in this together," she said, raising her glass. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," I echoed, clinking my glass with hers. The next few months were a blend of routine and small victories. Each doctor's visit brought good news. My strength was returning, and with it, a newfound determination to live life on my terms. The treatments had worked, and the doctors were optimistic. I was officially in remission. As I walked into the office that morning, I felt a sense of pride. I had not only kept my job through the toughest times, but also excelled. My team greeted me with warm smiles and congratulations. The workday was busy, but I didn't mind. Being productive gave me a sense of normalcy. Later, I met Sarah for lunch. She had been more than a friend. She was my pillar of strength. "You look radiant, Emily," she said as we sat down at our favorite cafe. "I feel it too, Sarah. It's like a new beginning," I responded, smiling. "And you deserve every bit of it." "So, what's next for you?" she asked, sipping her coffee. "I've been thinking about that. I want to give back, maybe volunteer at the cancer center. Share my story, help others," I said, the idea resonating with me more and more. "That's wonderful, Emily. You'll be amazing at it," she encouraged. After lunch, I went for a walk in the park. The sun was shining and the air was fresh. I took a moment to sit on a bench and just breathe. Life was precious, and I was here, living it. As I walked back home, my phone rang. It was my boss, Mr. Thompson. "Emily, good news. The board has approved your proposal for the new project," he said. "That's fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Thompson." "I won't let you down," I replied, excitement building up. "I know you won't. Keep up the good work," he said, before ending the call. Back at home, I reflected on my journey. From the shock of my diagnosis to the betrayal and divorce, it had been a roller coaster of emotions. But here I was, standing tall. I decided to write a blog post, sharing my story with the world. As I typed, the words flowed effortlessly. It was a story of pain, resilience, and ultimately, triumph. When I hit publish, I felt a sense of liberation. My story was out there, and if it could inspire even one person, it was worth it.
My name is Helen Collins. I'm 29 years old, and I work at the local library in a small town that most people have probably never heard of. My life is simple, maybe too simple for some, but it's mine. I've always been the quiet type, preferring the company of books to the loud outside world. The library is my sanctuary. It's a small, old building with creaky floors and shelves that have seen better days. But to me, it's perfect. Every day, I open the library doors at 8 a.m., turn on the lights, and breathe in the familiar scent of books. It's a routine that never gets old. My parents passed away when I was young, so I was raised by my grandmother. She was a kind woman, always encouraging me to read and learn. But she's gone now too, and I'm all alone. No siblings, no close relatives, just me and my small world. "Good morning, Helen." Mr. Jenkins, a regular visitor, greets me as he walks in. He's an elderly man who spends his days reading history books. "Good morning, Mr. Jenkins. The new shipment of history books arrived yesterday. I've set them aside for you," I reply with a smile. "Ah, you know me too well, dear," he chuckles, shuffling towards the designated shelf. The day goes on like this, with familiar faces coming and going. I help a group of kids find books for their school project, recommend a romance novel to Mrs. Harrison, and guide Mr. Thompson to the science fiction section. It's a quiet life, but I like it. I find comfort in the predictability, the routine. And then one day, everything changed. The day Jack walked into my life. He came in looking for a book, but I could tell he wasn't the regular library type. He seemed out of place with his crisp suit and confident stride. "Can you help me find a book?" he asked, his voice smooth and inviting. "Of course. What are you looking for?" I replied, trying to keep my composure. "It's a novel, The Great Gatsby, I believe." "Right this way," I said, leading him to the classic section. As I handed him the book, our hands brushed briefly, sending a jolt through me. It was a simple touch, but it lingered in my mind. "Thank you, Helen," he said, reading my name tag. "I'm Jack." "It's nice to meet you, Jack." That brief encounter marked the beginning of everything. The beginning of a love that I thought would last a lifetime. The beginning of a journey that would take me from the quiet life I knew into a world of chaos and betrayal. If only I had known then what I know now, maybe things would have been different. But life doesn't come with a warning label, and sometimes we just have to learn the hard way. After that first meeting, Jack began to visit the library more frequently. It was odd, considering he didn't strike me as the reading type. But every time he came in, he'd ask for a book recommendation and then spend a few minutes chatting with me. One day, he walked in just as I was struggling with a box of newly arrived books. "Need a hand with that?" he offered, walking over. "That would be great, thanks," I said, relieved. As we placed the books on the shelves, he asked, "So, Helen, what got you into working at a library?" I shrugged. "I've always loved books. They're like friends, you know. Plus, it's nice and quiet here." He laughed. "I can see that. It's like a whole different world." Our conversations grew longer with each visit. I found out that Jack worked in his family's business, something to do with real estate. He was easy to talk to, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone was genuinely interested in me. Then one day, he surprised me. "Helen, would you like to have dinner with me tonight?" he asked, a hopeful look in his eyes. I was taken aback. "Like a date?" "Yes, like a date," he smiled. I hesitated. This was new territory for me, but there was something about him that made me want to say yes. "Okay, sure, I'd like that," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. We went to a small restaurant in town. It wasn't fancy, but it was cozy. We talked about everything and nothing, and for a few hours, I forgot about my usually solitary life. Walking home, Jack said, "I had a really great time tonight, Helen. You're very different from the people I usually meet." I didn't know how to respond, so I just smiled. He continued, "I'd like to see you again. Would that be okay?" I nodded. Yes, I'd like that. From then on, we started seeing each other more regularly. He'd take me out to dinner, or we'd go for walks. It was nice. For once, I felt like I was part of something more, part of a world that wasn't just about books and quietness. It wasn't long before I fell for him. Hard. He was charming and attentive, and he made me feel special. And when he proposed, I didn't hesitate. I said yes. Looking back, I wish I had seen the signs. I wish I had known that the charm was just a mask, a cover for something much less pleasant. But love has a way of blinding you, of making you ignore the warning signs. And I was very much in love, or at least I thought I was. After Jack and I got engaged, things started to change. It began with his parents. They didn't approve of me from the start. They thought I was below their son because I didn't come from money. The first time I met them, it was clear they didn't like me. We were at their house for dinner, and I was nervous. It was a big, fancy house, nothing like what I was used to. "Helen, this is my mother, Margaret, and my father, Richard," Jack introduced. "Nice to meet you," I said, trying to smile. Margaret looked me up and down. So you're the girl who works at the library." "Yes, I am," I replied, feeling smaller by the second. Richard chimed in. Jack, couldn't you find someone more suitable? I felt like crawling into a hole. The dinner was long and uncomfortable. They made it clear they thought I wasn't good enough for their son. But Jack stood up for me, which made me love him even more. Before our wedding, they insisted on a prenuptial agreement. They said it was just a formality. I didn't have much to lose, so I agreed without making a fuss. Once we got married, I moved into Jack's house, which was actually his parents' house. They had given it to him as a wedding gift, but they acted like it was still theirs. His parents came over all the time, unannounced. They'd walk in and start ordering me around. "Helen, make us some coffee," Margaret would demand as soon as she walked in. And I would, without saying anything. I didn't want to cause trouble. One day, Margaret pointed at the TV and said, "Remember, Helen, in case of divorce, you can't claim this." It was like that with everything. They reminded me constantly that everything in the house wasn't mine. Jack started changing too. He wasn't the man I fell in love with. He started joining in on the jokes his parents made about me. One evening, I was trying to decide what to wear for a family event. I asked Jack for his opinion. "This one makes you look less drab," he said, laughing. I was hurt. It was like he was a different person around his parents. He didn't stand up for me anymore. Instead, he laughed along with them. It was exhausting, living in that house. I felt like an outsider, an unwanted guest. I kept hoping things would get better, but they only got worse. The stress got to me. I started having stomach pains, bad ones. I tried to ignore them, but one day I collapsed at the library. I woke up in the hospital. The doctor said it was stress-related. I was in the hospital for a few days. Jack didn't visit. He didn't even call. I felt so alone. Then, one day, a notary came to my room. He had news. My great-aunt, someone I barely remembered, had passed away, and she had left me her fortune, $30 million. I couldn't believe it. I didn't even know what to do with that kind of money, but suddenly, I wasn't just the poor girl from the library anymore. When Jack and his parents found out, they came to visit. Suddenly, they were all smiles and sweetness. "Darling, we're so happy for you," Margaret said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Yes, we're a family. We should support each other," Richard added. I didn't buy it. It was too much of a change. After they left, I overheard them talking outside my room. They didn't know I was listening. "She's such a fool. Can you believe our luck?" Jack laughed. "We need to make sure she doesn't leave you, Jack. Maybe you should have a child with her." "That will tie her down," Margaret suggested. I felt sick to my stomach. These people didn't care about me. They just wanted my money. I knew then what I had to do. I had to get out of that house, away from these people. I had to take control of my life. I wasn't going to be their victim anymore. I left the hospital with a plan in my mind. I knew what I had to do. As I got home, Jack and his parents were waiting. They were all smiles, acting like the caring family they never were. "Oh, Helen, we were so worried about you," Margaret exclaimed. I nodded but didn't say much. I needed to act normal, not to tip them off. Jack came closer. "So, when do you get the inheritance?" he asked, a little too eagerly. I looked at him, the man I thought I loved, and realized I didn't even recognize him anymore. "Soon," I said. "But it's not something you need to worry about." His smile faltered a bit. "But we're married, Helen. What's yours is mine, right?" I forced a smile. "Of course, darling." That night, I couldn't sleep. Their voices echoed in my head, their fake concern, their greed. It made me sick. I got up and started writing. I wrote down everything they had done, everything they had said. It was like a dam had broken, and years of pent-up frustration and pain poured out. The next morning, I had a meeting with a lawyer. I explained everything, showed him the prenuptial agreement. He was shocked but said the agreement would protect me. "You're doing the right thing," he assured me. When I got back, I found Jack and his parents in the living room. They looked up as I walked in. "There she is, our brave girl," Richard said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I sat down, clutching my purse. "I have something to say." They all looked at me, curious. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice steady. The room went silent. Then Margaret erupted. "What? You ungrateful little—" Jack was on his feet. "Helen, you can't be serious. We love you." "Do you, Jack?" "Because I don't feel loved. I feel used." Margaret was fuming. "We'll sue you. We'll take half of your inheritance." I reached into my purse and pulled out a copy of the prenuptial agreement. "Actually, you can't. This says neither of us can claim the other's property in case of divorce." They were speechless. For the first time, I felt in control. I stood up. "I'm leaving. I don't want any of you to contact me." I walked out of that house, their shouts and insults trailing behind me. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. But as I drove away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was free from their disdain, their manipulation. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew it had to be better than the past. I rented a small apartment in the city. It was nothing fancy, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. I was still dealing with the divorce, but I felt like I could handle it. One day, I got a call from the lawyer. "Helen, there's something you should know about your great-aunt's will." I was puzzled. "What about it?" "There's a condition. You need to use a portion of your inheritance for a charitable cause. It was your great-aunt's final wish." I was surprised. I had no idea. The lawyer continued. "She was quite the philanthropist. It seems she wanted to pass that on to you." I hung up the phone, deep in thought. My great-aunt had given me a chance to do something good. It felt like a sign, a push in a new direction. I started researching charities and causes. I wanted to do something meaningful, something that would make a difference. That's when I stumbled upon a small organization that helped women who were victims of domestic abuse. It struck a chord with me. I contacted them and set up a meeting. The woman I met, Linda, was passionate and dedicated. "We provide shelter, legal aid, and counseling to women who have nowhere else to go," Linda explained. I listened, moved by the stories she shared. "I want to help," I said, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. With Linda's guidance, I used a part of the inheritance to fund a new shelter. It was an incredible feeling, knowing I was helping other women find a way out, just like I had. A few weeks later, Linda invited me to the opening of the shelter. It was a small event, but the atmosphere was full of hope and gratitude. As people mingled, I noticed a familiar face in the crowd. It was Sarah, an old colleague from the library. "Helen, is that you?" she asked, surprised. "Sarah, it's been so long," I said, hugging her. "What are you doing here?" she asked. I told her about the shelter, about my involvement. She listened, her eyes wide. "That's incredible, Helen. I had no idea." "It's a new chapter for me," I said, smiling. We spent the evening catching up. It felt good to reconnect with an old friend. It felt like pieces of my life were slowly falling back into place. As the event wrapped up, Linda came over. "Helen, I can't thank you enough. This shelter will change lives." I looked around at the faces of the women who now had a safe place to go. "It's the least I could do," I said, feeling a warmth in my heart that I hadn't felt in a very long time. The days started to blend into one another, each filled with the rewarding work at the shelter. I was finding a new sense of purpose, something that was truly mine. Then, out of the blue, my phone rang. It was a number I hadn't seen in a while, Jack's. My heart raced with a mixture of emotions, but curiosity won. "Hello, Jack," I said, my voice calm. "Helen, I need to talk to you. Can we meet? It's urgent." His voice sounded desperate. Reluctantly, I agreed to meet him at a public coffee shop, hoping that being in a familiar place would give me strength. Sitting across from Jack, he looked different, defeated, almost pitiful. His eyes were pleading. "Helen, I made a huge mistake. I want you back. I've realized how much you mean to me," he blurted out. I looked at him, feeling nothing but contempt. "Why now, Jack?" He sighed. "My parents, they controlled everything. They were the reason our marriage failed. I was weak, but I'm different now." I felt a surge of anger. "You blame your parents? You stood by while they treated me like dirt. You laughed with them, Jack." He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Please, Helen, I know I was wrong. I've changed." I stared at him, seeing the man I once loved but now felt nothing for. "Changed or not, it's too late. I feel nothing for you, Jack. Nothing but contempt." His face fell, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the man I married. But it was fleeting. "I'm sorry, Jack. I've moved on. I have a life now, a purpose. There's no place for you in it," I said firmly. He nodded slowly, a look of resignation on his face. "I understand. I just had to try." Leaving the coffee shop, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. Truly over. The next day, there was an event at the shelter. A local artist had donated a sculpture, and it was to be unveiled in the garden. As I stood there, surrounded by people who supported and believed in me, I felt a sense of belonging. Sarah, my old colleague from the library, stood beside me. "You've done something amazing here, Helen," she said, smiling. The artist pulled the cover off the sculpture, revealing a figure of a woman reaching up to the sky. It symbolized hope, strength, and new beginnings. Applause filled the air, and for a moment, everything felt right in the world. Linda, the woman who had helped me so much, came over. "Helen, this is just the beginning. There's so much more we can do." I looked around at the faces filled with hope and knew she was right. This was my new beginning, and I was ready to embrace it fully. My new life was busy and fulfilling. Every day at the shelter brought new challenges and rewards. My confidence grew, and for the first time in years, I felt in control of my destiny. I even started taking self-defense classes, something I would have never imagined doing before. One day, as I was leaving the shelter, I saw a car parked outside. It was my mother-in-law, Margaret, and she stepped out as soon as she saw me. "Helen, we need to talk," she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard. "I have nothing to say to you, Margaret," I replied, my voice steady. "Please, just hear me out. I've realized how wrong we were," she pleaded. I stopped and looked at her. She seemed genuine, but I couldn't forget the past. "What do you want, Margaret?" "I want to apologize. I treated you terribly. I've lost my son because of it, and I don't want to lose you, too. You were like the daughter I never had," she said, her eyes glistening with tears. I felt a pang of something. Sympathy, perhaps, but I pushed it away. "Margaret, you made my life a living hell. An apology won't change that. I've moved on, and I suggest you do the same," I said firmly. She reached out to me, but I stepped back. "Please, Helen, I know I can't undo the past, but I want to make things right." I shook my head. "It's too late for that. Goodbye, Margaret." As I walked away, I felt her gaze on my back, but I didn't look back. I had learned to stand up for myself, and there was no going back to the way things were. The next day, I received a letter from Jack's lawyer. He was contesting the divorce settlement. I wasn't surprised, but I was ready. I met with my lawyer, a sharp woman named Rachel. "He's got no leg to stand on, Helen. The prenuptial agreement is clear. He's just trying to intimidate you," she said confidently. I nodded. "I'm not afraid of him anymore. Let's fight this." The court date arrived, and I walked in with my head held high. Jack was there with his lawyer, and for a moment, our eyes met. There was a flash of the old Jack, the one I had loved, but it vanished quickly. The judge listened to both sides and then made her decision. The prenuptial agreement stood, and Jack's claims were dismissed. I felt a surge of relief and triumph. After the court session, Jack approached me. "Helen, I'm sorry. I was wrong," he said, his voice low. I looked at him, seeing the man I once loved, but now felt nothing for. "Goodbye, Jack. Take care of yourself," I said, and walked away. As I left the courtroom, I felt a sense of closure. That chapter of my life was finally over, and a new one was just beginning. At the shelter, we were planning a fundraiser, and it was taking all my attention. The support from the community was overwhelming, and I felt a deep sense of gratitude. The night of the fundraiser arrived, and the place was buzzing with energy. People from all walks of life had come to support our cause. As I looked around, I realized how far I had come. From a quiet, timid woman to someone who stood up for herself and others. "Helen, you did it. This is amazing," Sarah said, coming up to me. I smiled. We did it. And there's so much more to do. As the event went on, I felt a sense of accomplishment and purpose. This was my life now, and I was exactly where I was meant to be.
My name is Emma. I'm 30 years old, and I work as a financial advisor. That's where I met David, my now ex-husband. I remember that day like it was yesterday. He walked into my office with a stack of papers and a troubled look on his face. "Emma, right?" he said, offering a handshake. "I'm David Caldwell. I heard you're the best in sorting out financial messes." "That's what they say," I replied, smiling. "Let's see what we can do about yours." David was tall, with short brown hair and eyes that seemed to smile even when he didn't. As I sifted through his documents, we started talking. It wasn't just about numbers and taxes. We talked about our favorite movies, music, and even debated over the best pizza in town. He had this easy way about him that made hours feel like minutes. "You know, I never thought sorting my finances would be this enjoyable," David admitted as we wrapped up. "Guess I have a magic touch," I joked. David laughed. "Would you like to grab a coffee sometime? My treat, for making this not as painful as I expected." That coffee turned into dinner, and dinners turned into weekend getaways. We were inseparable. After 6 months, David proposed, and without a moment's hesitation, I said yes. It was a whirlwind romance, but it felt right. Our wedding was simple yet beautiful. Standing there, exchanging vows, I thought I had found my forever. David's mom, Barbara, was there too. She was a stern-looking woman, but seemed happy for us. "You better give me grandkids soon," she whispered to me with a half-smile. Life as a married couple was blissful at first. David worked in real estate, and I continued at my firm. We shared dinners, movie nights, and long walks. We were a team, or so I thought. However, things began to change when the topic of children came up more frequently. It started with occasional remarks from Barbara, but soon became her constant demand. She would call and ask if I was pregnant yet, and during visits she'd say, "A grandchild would make this family complete." David always laughed it off. "Mom, give us some time," he'd say, but the pressure was building. At first, I tried to be understanding. After all, she was just an excited grandmother-to-be. But her persistence started to weigh on me. It was like our marriage wasn't enough without a child. "David, your mom needs to back off a bit," I said to him one evening. "I feel like she's more in our marriage than we are." David looked uncomfortable. "She's just excited, Emma. Let's not make a big deal out of it." As time went on, Barbara's influence in our life became more and more evident. It wasn't just about her constant nagging for grandchildren. She had opinions about everything, from how we should manage our finances to what we should eat. One Saturday morning, David and I were enjoying breakfast when his phone rang. It was Barbara. David put it on speaker, as he usually did. "David, dear, are you both eating healthy? Remember, a healthy diet is important for conceiving," she said in her usual authoritative tone. David chuckled. "Yes, Mom, we're eating healthy. Don't worry." I forced a smile, but inside I was screaming. It felt like she was monitoring our every move. Things got more intense when Barbara started visiting us more frequently. One evening, she came over unannounced, carrying a stack of parenting books. "Emma, you should start reading these. It's never too early to prepare," she said, dumping the books on the coffee table. I glanced at David, hoping he would say something, but he just shrugged. "Thanks, Barbara. We'll look into them," I said, trying to sound grateful. Her visits became a regular occurrence. It was like she was keeping tabs on us, making sure we were doing everything right to have a child. And every time she brought up the topic, David would just nod and agree with her. One night, after another of Barbara's visits, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "David, we need to talk," I said, frustration evident in my voice. "What's up?" he asked, not looking up from the TV. "It's your mom. She's suffocating us with this baby talk. We barely have time to be a couple without her interference," I said. David finally looked at me. "She's just excited, Emma. She means well." "Excited or obsessed?" I countered. "It feels like she's the third person in our marriage." David sighed. "She's my mom. What do you want me to do? Tell her to stop caring?" "It's not about caring, David. It's about respecting our space, our decisions. Can't you see that?" David didn't respond. He just turned back to the TV, and that was the end of our conversation. But it wasn't the end of the issue. If anything, it only got worse. Barbara's visits became more frequent and her comments more intrusive. "You two should go on a vacation. Just relax. It'll help with conception," she suggested one day. "Maybe Emma should quit her job, reduce the stress," she said on another occasion. It felt like she was dictating our life, and David was letting her. I started feeling like a stranger in my own marriage. The love and understanding that had once bonded David and me seemed to be slipping away, lost in the shadow of Barbara's overbearing presence. The constant pressure about having a baby started to take its toll on both of us. David and I were arguing more often, and the romance that once filled our home seemed to have evaporated. Still, amidst all this, I held on to the hope that things would get better, that we'd find our way back to each other. But then came the day that changed everything. David came home late one evening, looking more downcast than usual. I was in the kitchen, trying to fix us a quick dinner. "David, is everything okay?" I asked, concerned. He slumped into a chair at the kitchen table, burying his face in his hands. "We need to talk, Emma." That tone in his voice sent a chill down my spine. I sat across from him, my heart pounding. "It's about us. Trying to have a baby," he started, not meeting my eyes. "What about it?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. "We went to the doctor, remember? For those tests?" he said, finally looking up at me. I nodded. A few weeks ago, we had gone for a fertility checkup, hoping it would put Barbara's nagging to rest. David took a deep breath. "The results came in today. It's not you, Emma. It's me." I felt a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and confusion. "What do you mean?" "The doctor said I have a low sperm count. It's unlikely that I can father a child," he said, his voice breaking. I reached for his hand, trying to offer some comfort. "David, it's okay. We can figure this out together. Maybe there's treatment or other options." He pulled his hand away, shaking his head. "No, you don't understand. I won't go through any treatment. It's just not something I can do." I was stunned. "But why? If there's a chance." "It's my decision, Emma. I just can't," he said firmly. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man I loved, who always seemed so strong and confident, was giving up without even trying. "David, please, don't let this come between us. We can work through it," I pleaded. He stood up, avoiding my gaze. "I need some time alone to think about all this." And just like that, he walked out of the kitchen, leaving me sitting there, trying to process it all. I couldn't understand why he wouldn't even consider treatment. Was his pride more important than our chance to have a family? The next few days were like walking on eggshells. David barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was short and cold. I felt a growing distance between us, a crack in the foundation of our marriage that seemed to be widening with each passing day. Then came the day that turned the crack into a gaping hole. David had been out late again. I was in bed, pretending to be asleep when he came in. He thought I was asleep and started talking to someone on the phone. "Yes, Mom, I got the results. It's not good." No, I don't want treatment. I know, but I can't. Yes, I'll figure something out. Hearing him talk to his mom about something so personal, something he barely discussed with me, felt like a betrayal. It was clear that Barbara's shadow loomed larger over our marriage than I had ever realized. I lay there in the dark, tears streaming down my face, feeling utterly alone. Our marriage was crumbling, and I didn't know how to save it. Life at home had become unbearable. David and I were like strangers, living under the same roof. The love and warmth that once defined our relationship seemed like a distant memory. But just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, life threw me a curveball. I had been feeling under the weather for a few days. At first, I thought it was just stress, but then I missed my period. A part of me was scared to even entertain the thought, but I knew I had to find out. So, one morning, I bought a pregnancy test. Sitting in the bathroom, waiting for the result felt like the longest few minutes of my life. And then, there it was. A positive result. I was pregnant. For a moment, I was in disbelief. After all the talk about David's infertility, this felt like a miracle. A ray of hope in the midst of our crumbling marriage. But how would David react? I decided to tell him that evening. He came home late, as usual, and barely acknowledged me. I took a deep breath and approached him. "David, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. He looked up, his expression weary. "What is it now, Emma?" "I'm pregnant," I blurted out. For a moment, there was silence. Then he laughed, a bitter, cynical laugh. "Pregnant? How? According to the doctors, I can't." "I don't know, but the test is positive. We're going to have a baby," I said, tears welling up in my eyes. He stood up abruptly, anger flashing in his eyes. "This is some kind of joke, right? You're trying to trap me?" I was shocked. "Trap you? David, I'm telling you we're going to have a baby. Our baby." He paced the room, running his hands through his hair. "No, this can't be. You must have cheated. That's it, isn't it? You cheated on me." I felt like I had been slapped. "Cheated? How can you even say that? I've been nothing but faithful to you." He wasn't listening. He was too consumed by his own rage and disbelief. "Get out. I want you out of this house," he yelled. "David, please, let's talk about this. We can go to the doctor, get a confirmation," I pleaded. But it was like talking to a wall. He stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. That night, I slept in the guest room, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. The next day, David was gone before I woke up. His mother, Barbara, showed up instead. The look on her face was a mix of anger and disgust. "You should be ashamed of yourself, Emma. Trapping my son with another man's child," she spat. "I didn't cheat on David. This child is his," I defended myself. She laughed, a cold, mocking laugh. "Do you take me for a fool? My son can't have children. You're just a gold digger, trying to secure your future." I was stunned by her cruelty. "This is David's child. I've never been with anyone else." She moved closer, her voice venomous. "You have 1 week to pack your things and leave. And don't even think about asking for alimony or child support. You won't get a dime from us." The ultimatum from Barbara was the last straw. I knew I couldn't continue living in a house filled with resentment and accusations. It was time to take control of my life, for my sake and for the baby's. First things first, I filed for divorce. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. David and his mother tried to make it difficult. They wanted a piece of everything I had, claiming it was their right. But I had a strong case. Everything I owned, all my savings and property, were mine long before David entered my life. Their attempts to grab what wasn't theirs failed miserably. As for alimony, I didn't ask for a penny. I wanted no financial ties to David. No reason for him or his mother to interfere in my life again. I was determined to start anew, free from their toxicity. I found a modest apartment, not too fancy, but cozy enough to be a fresh start. Packing up my things from the house was bittersweet. Every photo, every piece of furniture had a memory attached to it, but I was ready to leave them behind. The day I moved out, David was conspicuously absent. Maybe he couldn't face me, or perhaps he just didn't care. Either way, it didn't matter. I left the keys on the counter and closed that chapter of my life. The first few nights in my new apartment were the hardest. the silence was overwhelming, and the reality of my situation often brought me to tears. But I found solace in the little life growing inside me. Talking to my unborn child became a nightly ritual, filling the emptiness with hope and love. Gradually, life in my new apartment started to feel less like a refuge and more like a home. I found comfort in my routine, and the bond with my unborn child grew stronger each day. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some old things, I found a photo of David and me from happier times. A pang of sadness hit me, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of relief. That chapter of my life was over. Then my phone rang. It was David. "Emma, I've received the divorce papers," he said, his voice emotionless. "I'm glad they reached you. Please take care of the formalities," I responded calmly. There was a pause before he added, "I won't bother you about the baby. You won't hear from me again." It was a cold goodbye, but it was closure. As I hung up, I realized that in my solitude, I had found an inner strength I never knew I had. I was ready to face the future, not as David's estranged wife, but as a strong, independent woman and a loving mother. It was a quiet evening, and I was sitting on the couch, browsing through a magazine while Jacob, my 4-year-old son, played with his toys on the floor. The peace was interrupted by a sudden knock on the door. Puzzled, I went to answer it, wondering who it could be at this hour. Standing there was a woman I barely recognized, but her eyes held a familiar sorrow. "Hi, Emma. It's been a long time," she said hesitantly. It took me a moment, but then I recognized her as Linda, a friend I had known through my ex-husband. "Linda, yes, it has been. What brings you here?" She shifted uncomfortably, looking past me at Jacob, who was now peeking around my legs. "I thought you should know about David." David. Just hearing his name after all these years sent a chill down my spine. "What about him?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Linda sighed. "He's not doing well, Emma. After you left, things went downhill for him. He became an alcoholic. He remarried a few years ago and had a child, but the boy was born with disabilities. David couldn't handle it. He left them, divorced his wife, and now he's refusing to pay child support. He's in legal trouble." The news hit me hard, but not in the way Linda might have expected. I felt a deep sadness, not for David, but for his child and the woman he had left behind. "That's terrible," I said softly. Linda nodded. "I thought you should know. Given your past with him." I appreciated her concern, but knew I had to set boundaries. "Thank you for telling me, Linda, but that part of my life is over. David made his choices, and they have nothing to do with me or my son." Linda looked at Jacob, then back at me. "I understand, Emma. I just thought—" I smiled, albeit a little sadly. "I appreciate it, Linda, but my focus is on Jacob and our life now. What David does or doesn't do isn't my concern anymore." She nodded, seemingly understanding. "I hope you and Jacob are happy, Emma. You both deserve it." "Thank you, we are." I glanced at Jacob, who was now fully engrossed in his toys again. "And I intend to keep it that way." After Linda left, I closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, taking deep breaths. The past had a way of sneaking up on you, but I was determined not to let it overshadow the life I had built for myself and my son. The park was vibrant that day, with laughter and the sounds of children playing. I was there with Jacob, my heart swelling with pride as I watched him run around. Then, a familiar, unwelcome voice sliced through the air. "Emma, is that you?" I turned, my heart sinking. Barbara, my former mother-in-law, was approaching, her eyes fixed on Jacob. "Barbara?" I said coolly. "What are you doing here?" Ignoring my tone, her gaze was locked on Jacob. "He's grown so much. He's your son, right?" "Yes, this is Jacob," I answered, moving subtly to stand between her and my son. Barbara's eyes sparkled with a disturbing kind of eagerness. "I was hoping to see him. After all, he's my grandson." I felt a wave of anger. "And why would you want to see him?" "Well, you know, my other grandson." She trailed off, her face twisting. "He's not... well, he's sick. It's just not the same. I want to be part of a healthy grandchild's life." Her words struck me like a slap. The contempt in her voice for her own grandchild was appalling. "Barbara," I said, my voice steely, You have no right to be part of Jacob's life. Not after everything that happened. But Emma, that was all David's doing, she protested. I shook my head. You supported him. You turned against me when I was carrying your grandchild. And now you speak with such disgust about your other grandson just because he's sick. That's unforgivable. Barbara's face reddened. You can't keep me away from my grandson. I can, and I will, I declared firmly. Jacob doesn't need someone in his life who values people based on their health. He will not be part of your twisted view of family. She looked like she was about to argue, but I cut her off. This conversation is over. Stay away from us, Barbara. Your presence is neither wanted nor welcomed. I took Jacob's hand and walked away, leaving Barbara standing alone, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. As we walked, Jacob looked up at me, his innocent eyes filled with questions. Mommy, who was that lady? That was someone we used to know, sweetheart, I replied gently, but she's not part of our lives anymore. Sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky with warm colors, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Jacob was inside, his laughter echoing as he played. Life had settled into a calm rhythm, the storms of the past now distant memories. Mom, look what I made. Jacob's voice pulled me back from my thoughts. He came running out, holding a drawing in his hands. It was a picture of the two of us, smiling under a big, bright sun. It's beautiful, Jacob, I said, pulling him into a hug. You're quite the artist. He beamed with pride. I want to put it on the fridge. Let's do that, I smiled, following him inside. As we walked, I thought about how far we'd come. There was a time when the weight of the past felt crushing, but now it seemed like a distant echo. Later that evening, after Jacob was asleep, I sat down with a cup of tea, reflecting on everything. The phone rang, disrupting the quiet. I hesitated but decided to answer it. Hello? It was my sister Anna. Hey Emma, I just wanted to check in. How are you and Jacob doing? We're doing well, Anna. Jacob's growing up so fast, I replied, a smile in my voice. I heard about your run-in with Barbara. Are you okay? She asked, concern lacing her words. I sighed. Yeah, it was unexpected, but I'm okay. It's just a reminder of the past. I know it's tough, but you've come so far, Emma. You're strong, and you've built a wonderful life for you and Jacob, she said encouragingly. Her words warmed my heart. Thanks, Anna. It means a lot. We talked for a while longer, about small things, everyday life. It was comforting, this connection with my sister, a reminder of the support system I had. After hanging up, I went to the living room where Jacob's drawing was displayed on the fridge. Looking at it, I realized how much we had both grown. The pain and anger of the past had faded, leaving room for healing and new beginnings. I walked to Jacob's room, watching him sleep peacefully. Leaning down, I kissed his forehead gently. Good night, my little artist, I whispered. Back on the porch, I gazed at the stars emerging in the night sky. The echoes of the past were fading, their hold on me loosening. In their place was hope, a quiet strength, and the unconditional love between a mother and her son. I'm sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the old, chipped mug that's been with me for more years than I care to remember. It's just a regular Tuesday evening, but somehow it feels like the weight of my entire life is pressing down on me. I'm Emma, a 45-year-old woman who feels like she's living a life filled with more regrets than joys. My husband, Richard, is sitting across from me, scrolling through his phone, utterly disinterested in anything I have to say. I met him when I was just a bright-eyed 20-year-old. He was charming, charismatic, and everything I thought I wanted. But here we are, 25 years later, and I can barely recognize the man I fell in love with. Dinner was good, I say, attempting to start a conversation. He doesn't even look up. It was okay. You've made better. His words sting, but I'm used to it. This has been my life for the past several years. The man I married, who once looked at me like I was his entire world, now barely acknowledges my existence unless it's to criticize me. I remember when I first introduced Richard to my dad. My dad was a police officer, a man who had seen the worst of people in his line of work. He took one look at Richard and said, "Emma, that man is bad news." But I was young and in love, and I thought my dad was just being overprotective. "Dad, you don't know him like I do. Richard is a good man," I had insisted. "Emma, I've been a cop for over 30 years. I know how to read people. That man is going to bring you nothing but trouble," my father had replied, his voice laced with concern. But I didn't listen. In fact, I did something I now deeply regret. I cut my father out of my life. Richard suggested it, saying we didn't need negative people who didn't believe in us. And like a fool, I agreed. For 25 years, I didn't speak to my dad. I didn't call him, didn't visit, didn't even tell him when I had my daughter Lily, who's now in college. My thoughts are interrupted by Richard's voice. "Are you even listening to me?" I realize he's been talking while I was lost in my thoughts. "Sorry, what were you saying?" "I was saying that you need to start taking better care of yourself. You've let yourself go. And it's embarrassing," he says, his tone cold. I feel a lump form in my throat. This is my life. A husband who finds every opportunity to bring me down. And as I sit there, taking in his harsh words, I can't help but think that my father was right all along. My phone rings, pulling me out of my thoughts. I glance at the caller ID and my heart skips a beat. It's a number I haven't seen in over 2 decades. It's my dad. I answer, my voice shaky. "Hello? Emma, it's your dad. I need to talk to you. It's important." His voice is weak, nothing like the strong, confident tone I remember. "Dad, I'm so sorry for everything." I start, but he cuts me off. "Emma, I'm sick. The doctors say I don't have much time left. I have cancer." The room spins around me as his words sink in. My dad, the man I turned my back on, is dying. And suddenly, all the years of silence, all the missed opportunities to make things right, weigh heavily on me. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I'll come to see you. I'll help in any way I can," I say, tears streaming down my face. After ending the call, I turn to Richard, hoping, maybe foolishly, for some kind of support. "Richard, my dad is sick. He has cancer. I need to help him." His reaction is like a slap in the face. "Good. The man never liked me. Can't wait for him to be gone." His words are like a knife to my heart. In that moment, I realize just how blind I've been. My husband, the man I chose over my own father, is cruel and heartless. And I can't help but wonder if my life would have been different if I had just listened to my dad all those years ago. I'm sitting on the edge of the bed in our bedroom, my hands trembling. The room feels cold, even though it's a warm night. Richard's words keep echoing in my head. Can't wait for him to be gone. How can he be so heartless? I thought I knew him, but it seems I've been living with a stranger. I pick up my phone again, dialing my dad's number. It rings, and then finally, he picks up. "Emma?" His voice is weak but filled with hope. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm going to help you. I don't know how yet, but I will find a way," I say, my voice choked with emotion. "Emma, you don't have to. You've got your own life." "No, Dad. You're my father. I should have been there for you all these years. I'm going to make this right." We talk a little more. He tells me about his condition, about the treatments he needs but can't afford. My heart aches. I've missed so much, and now, when he needs me the most, I feel helpless. After the call, I sit there, lost in thought. Then something inside me clicks. I can't let my father suffer because of my mistakes. I need to do something. I go to the living room where Richard is watching TV. "Richard, I've decided. I'm going to help my father. He needs money for his treatments. I'm going to use our savings." He looks at me like I've lost my mind. "You're going to do what? Are you crazy? That's our money, Emma. We saved that for us, for our future." "There won't be a future if I let my father die knowing I could have helped him. I can't live with that," I say, my resolve firm. He laughs, a cold, mocking laugh. "So, the prodigal daughter returns. You think playing the good daughter now will make up for all the years you ignored him? It's pathetic." His words sting, but I don't let them sway me. I don't care what you think. I'm doing this. I go to our home office and start transferring the money. It's a lot, almost all our savings. But it doesn't matter. This is for my dad, for all the years I wasn't there for him. When I finish, I feel a sense of relief, but it's short-lived. Richard storms into the room, his face red with anger. "You actually did it. You gave our money to that old man." "He's my father, Richard. He's dying. What was I supposed to do? Just let him suffer?" "You were supposed to think about us, about our life together. But you've always been selfish, Emma, always thinking about yourself." I'm stunned. How can he twist this into something about him? Selfish? I'm trying to save my father's life. How is that selfish? He doesn't answer. Instead, he turns and leaves the room, slamming the door behind him. I'm left standing there, feeling more alone than ever. But there's also a sense of determination inside me. For the first time in years, I'm standing up for what I believe in. It's scary, but it also feels right. I pack a small bag with some clothes and essentials. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I can't stay here, not with Richard. Not now. I write a note, telling him I'm going to my dad's, that I need some time to figure things out. I don't know if he'll even care, but I leave it on the kitchen counter anyway. Then, with my bag in hand, I step out of the house. The night air is cool on my skin, and as I walk to my car, I feel like I'm taking the first steps towards a new life. A life where I'm no longer bound by regrets and what-ifs. A life where I can try to make things right, even if it's a little too late. The drive to my dad's house feels endless. Streetlights blur past, and I'm alone with my thoughts, a mix of fear and determination. I haven't seen my dad in over 25 years, and now I'm rushing to him in the middle of the night because he's sick and I'm all he's got. When I finally pull up to the familiar old house, my heart is racing. The place looks much the same, though a bit more worn. I hesitate for a moment before getting out of the car. What am I going to say? How is he going to react? Taking a deep breath, I walk up to the front door and knock. It takes a few moments, but then the door opens, and there he is. My dad. He's older, frailer, but it's undeniably him. "Emma," he says, his voice cracking. "You came." I nod, fighting back tears. "I'm here, Dad. I'm so sorry." He steps aside, letting me in. The house smells the same as I remember, a mix of coffee and old books. We go to the living room and sit down. It's awkward at first, but then we start talking, and it's like the years start to melt away. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I should have been here," I say, my voice thick with emotion. "It's okay, Emma. You're here now. That's what matters." We talk about his illness, about the treatments he needs. He shows me the medical bills, and they're staggering, but I reassure him that I've got it covered. He tries to protest, but I won't hear it. Then I tell him about Richard, about how he reacted when I said I was going to help. I don't go into all the details, just that we had a fight and that I needed some time away. My dad listens, his expression somber. "I warned you about him, Emma, but you were young, in love. I understand." "But you were right, Dad. You were right all along." He reaches out, taking my hand. "What are you going to do now?" I shake my head. "I don't know, Dad. I just don't know." We sit there for a while, just talking. It's strange, but it feels good, like we're making up for lost time. Eventually, I get up to leave. I've got a lot to figure out, and it's late. But as I'm about to walk out the door, my dad stops me. "Emma, wait. There's something you should know." He goes to his desk and pulls out a folder, thick with papers. "I've been keeping tabs on Richard, ever since you married him. I knew he was bad news, and I wanted to protect you, just in case." He hands me the folder. It's all in there. His business deals, the women, everything. I wanted you to have it, just in case. I'm stunned. I take the folder, feeling its weight. "Dad, Thank you." He nods, a sad smile on his face. "I always wanted what was best for you, Emma. Always." I hug him, holding back tears. "I know, Dad. I know." The morning after I visited my dad, I'm sitting at my kitchen table, the folder he gave me lying unopened in front of me. I'm scared of what's inside, scared of what it means for my life, my marriage. But I know I can't ignore it. Taking a deep breath, I open the folder. There are bank statements, photos, notes. It's overwhelming. As I start to sift through the papers, the reality of my situation begins to sink in. Richard has been living a double life, and I was too blind to see it. There are photos of him with other women, some of them looking way too cozy. There are bank statements showing large amounts of money being moved around, and notes about shady business deals. It's a lot to process. I feel sick to my stomach. How could I have been so naive? How could I have ignored all the signs? I spend the morning going through everything, and by the time I'm done, I'm shaking with anger and betrayal. But there's also a sense of clarity. I know what I need to do. I call my dad. Dad, I looked through the folder. It's a lot. I'm sorry, Emma. I didn't want to burden you with it, but you needed to know. I understand, and thank you. I'm going to confront him. I can't let this go on any longer. Be careful, Emma. He's a dangerous man. I will be. I have to do this, for me, for us. After we hang up, I get ready. I feel like I'm preparing for battle. I put the most damning evidence in a smaller folder and head to Richard's office. When I get there, his secretary tries to stop me, but I push past her. I storm into his office, and he looks up, surprised. Emma, what are you doing here? We need to talk, I say, my voice steady even though my hands are shaking. He smirks. About what? About this, I say, throwing the folder on his desk. About your lies, your cheating, your dirty business. He goes pale, but then he regains his composure. You don't know what you're talking about. I know everything, Richard. My dad has been keeping tabs on you since we got married. It's all here. The women, the money, everything. He starts to get angry. Your dad? That old fool? He's just trying to break us up. He's always hated me. He was right about you, and I was too blind to see it, but not anymore. He stands up, coming around the desk. You're not going to ruin me, Emma. You're my wife. You're supposed to stand by me. Not anymore. I want a divorce, Richard. I want out of this sham of a marriage. He laughs, a cold, bitter laugh. You think you can just walk away? You think you can take me down? I won't let you. I'll ruin you first. I stand my ground, even though I'm scared. I'm not afraid of you anymore. I know the truth, and I'm not going to let you control me any longer. He looks at me, really looks at me, and I can see the realization dawning in his eyes. He knows he's lost. Get out, he says finally. Get out and don't come back. The next few days are a blur. I spend most of my time at my dad's house, trying to figure out my next move. The thought of going back to the house I shared with Richard makes my skin crawl. I can't face him, not yet. My dad is a rock during all of this. He listens, offers advice, but mostly just lets me talk. It's comforting, being here with him. It feels like I'm making up for lost time. One afternoon, we're sitting in the living room when my phone rings. It's a number I don't recognize, but I answer it anyway. Hello? Is this Emma Richards? A man's voice asks. Yes, it is. Who's this? My name is Detective Harris. I'm with the City Police Department. I'd like to talk to you about your husband. My heart skips a beat. What about him? We've been investigating him for some time now. We believe he's involved in a number of illegal activities. We received some information recently that has accelerated our investigation. I glance at my dad, who's watching me closely. What kind of information? It's best if we discuss this in person. Can you come down to the station? Yes, of course. I'll be there as soon as I can. I hang up, feeling a mix of fear and relief. It's happening. It's really happening. Dad, the police want to talk to me about Richard. They think he's involved in illegal activities. My dad nods. It's about time. You need to tell them everything, Emma. Don't hold back. I won't. I'm done protecting him. I head to the police station, my mind racing. When I get there, Detective Harris is waiting for me. He's a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a serious demeanor. Thank you for coming in, Mrs. Richards, he says as he leads me to an interview room. Please, call me Emma, and thank you for seeing me. We sit down, and he gets right to the point. We've been investigating your husband for some time. We believe he's involved in a number of fraudulent activities, including money laundering and embezzlement. I nod, trying to keep my composure. I believe you're right. I have some evidence that might help. I tell him everything. About the folder my dad gave me, about the bank statements, the photos, the notes. I tell him about the confrontation with Richard, about how he threatened me. Detective Harris listens, taking notes. When I'm done, he looks at me, his expression serious. This is very helpful, Emma. With your testimony and the evidence you've provided, we can build a strong case against your husband. What happens now? I ask, feeling a mix of emotions. We'll continue our investigation, gather more evidence. It's likely we'll need you to testify in court. Are you prepared for that? I nod, feeling a surge of determination. Yes, I'll do whatever it takes to make sure he pays for what he's done. Detective Harris nods. Good, we'll be in touch. And Emma, you're doing the right thing. I spend my days helping Dad around the house and taking him to his doctor's appointments. His health seems to be holding steady, a small blessing in the midst of everything else. One afternoon, while we're sitting in the living room, my phone buzzes with a message from Detective Harris. My heart leaps into my throat as I read it. Case moving forward. Charges filed against Richard. We'll need you to testify. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Dad, they're charging Richard. It's actually happening. Dad looks up from his newspaper, his eyes soft. Good. It's about time he faced the consequences. The day of the trial arrives. I wear a simple blue dress, wanting to look presentable, but not overdressed. Dad insists on coming with me, even though I tell him he doesn't have to. I'm not letting you face that man alone, he says, his voice firm. The courtroom is intimidating, with its high ceilings and wooden pews. Richard is already there, looking smug in his expensive suit. When he sees me, his expression darkens. I take my seat, trying to ignore the knots in my stomach. Dad sits next to me, a solid presence at my side. The trial begins. The prosecutor lays out the case against Richard. Fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. The evidence is overwhelming. I can see Richard squirming in his seat. Then it's my turn to testify. I take the stand, my hands shaking slightly. The prosecutor asks me to tell the court about my relationship with Richard, about the money he took, the abuse, the threats. I speak slowly, making sure to tell the truth, the whole truth. Richard's lawyer tries to shake me with his questions, but I stand firm. I'm not afraid of Richard anymore. When I'm done, I step down from the stand, feeling like a weight has been lifted from my shoulders. Dad gives me a small smile, his eyes proud. The trial goes on for several days. Witnesses, evidence, testimonies, it all blurs together. But through it all, I can see the case against Richard building, piece by piece. Finally, the jury goes out to deliberate. The wait is agonizing, every second stretching out endlessly. Dad and I don't talk much, just sit together in silent support. Then, the moment of truth arrives. The jury is back. We're called into the courtroom. My heart is pounding so hard I can barely hear anything else. The judge asks the jury for their verdict. The foreman stands up, a slip of paper in his hand. We find the defendant, Richard Richards, guilty on all counts. A wave of relief washes over me, so strong I almost feel dizzy. Richard is staring at the jury, his face a mask of disbelief. The judge thanks the jury and then turns to Richard. Given the severity of the crimes and the evidence presented, I hereby sentence you to 10 years in prison and order the return of all funds embezzled from Emma Richards. Richard's face crumples. He starts to say something, but the bailiffs are already leading him away. As I walk out of the courtroom, I feel like I'm walking on air. Justice has been served. Richard will pay for what he's done. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can finally start to move on. Dad puts his arm around me as we walk. I'm proud of you, Emma. You stood up to him. You did what was right. I lean into him, feeling tears prick my eyes. Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have done it without you. We walk out of the courthouse together, ready to face whatever comes next. Life after the trial feels different, like waking up from a long, turbulent dream. The house is quieter now, just me and Dad. We've settled into a comfortable routine, looking after each other. But there's one thing I haven't done yet, one loose end that still nags at me. My daughter, Lily. I've been thinking about her a lot, about how I've been a less than perfect mother, how I let her grow up in a toxic environment. The guilt gnaws at me every day. But today, I decide, is the day I'll try to make things right. I pick up my phone and dial her number, my hands trembling slightly. Mom? Lily sounds surprised when she answers. Hey Lily, can we talk? Maybe meet somewhere? There's a pause, and for a moment, I'm afraid she'll say no. But then she agrees, and we decide to meet at a small cafe near her college. I arrive early, nervous energy making me fidgety. When Lily walks in, my heart aches. She's grown into a beautiful young woman, but there's a wariness in her eyes that I hate to see. Hey, I say as she sits down. Hey, she replies, her voice guarded. I take a deep breath. Lily, I'm sorry. I know I wasn't the mother you needed. I let you down, let you grow up in a bad situation. I'm so sorry. Lily looks at me, her expression unreadable. Why now, Mom? Why after all this time? I know it's late, way too late, but I've left Richard, your father. He's in jail now. I've been trying to make things right, and I realized I need to start with you. Lily's eyes flicker with something, pain maybe, or disappointment. Mom, I spent years wishing you'd leave him, wishing we could just be a normal family, but you always chose him over me. Her words sting, but they're the truth. I know, and I can't change that, but I'm here now. I want to be better, do better, if you give me a chance. We sit in silence for a long time. I can see Lily wrestling with her emotions, and I don't blame her. I've hurt her, and it's not something that can be fixed with a simple apology. Finally, she speaks. I want to believe you, Mom, but it's not easy. I've got a lot of anger, a lot of hurt. I know, and I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. I just want a chance to show you that I can be a better mother, that I can be someone you can rely on. Lily sighs, running a hand through her hair. Okay, we can try, but it's going to take time. A wave of relief washes over me. Thank you, Lily. That's all I'm asking for. We talk for a while longer about her college, her plans for the future. It's awkward at times, but it feels like a start, like maybe there's a chance for us to build something new. Months pass, and the world around me starts to take on a new shape, a new meaning. Dad's health has been improving steadily. The doctors call it a miracle, but I think it's the love and care we've been surrounding him with. He's even started going for short walks around the neighborhood. Today, as I watch him sitting on the porch, reading a newspaper, a sense of calm washes over me. I walk over and sit beside him, taking in the peaceful morning. You're looking better every day, Dad, I say, smiling at him. He looks up, his eyes twinkling. Feeling better too, Emma. It's like I've been given a second chance at life. I nod, feeling a surge of gratitude. We both have, Dad. Just then, Lily arrives. She's been visiting more often, and with each visit, I feel our bond strengthening. She waves at us, a bright smile on her face. Morning, you two, she greets cheerfully. Morning, Lily, Dad replies. Join us. We were just enjoying the morning sun. Lily takes a seat, and for a while, we sit in comfortable silence, basking in the warmth of the sun and each other's company. Mom, I've been thinking, Lily starts, breaking the silence. I want to help people who've been in situations like ours, maybe volunteer at a shelter or something. My heart swells with pride. That's a wonderful idea, Lily. Dad nods in agreement. Using your experience to help others, that's a noble path. Lily's eyes are determined. I want to make a difference, even if it's small. I reach out and squeeze her hand. You already are, sweetheart. Our conversation drifts to lighter topics after that. Plans for the weekend, a new recipe I want to try, the book Dad's been reading. It feels normal, and for the first time in a long time, I feel content. I have my father, my daughter, and a newfound strength within me. I've survived the storm, and now I'm ready to embrace the calm after it. Ready to build a new life, a better life. A life where I'm not just surviving, but thriving.